Welcome. This is the Board County Commission work session for December 4th, 2012. It's about a little past 10 o'clock. We are beginning with our budget update. John Redman and Connie Garofalo are here to give us that update. Please begin.
Thank you. We're here today to talk about the budget update for 2012. Overall, the results are trending in the right direction. That is a positive direction. As you recall, the general fund has an operations side and a capital side. The operations side, between revenues and expenditures, is approximately $87,000 ahead of budget, and the capital side is approximately $777,000 ahead of the budget. I'll talk a little bit about the revenues and kind of go over the expenditures and the results of the fund balance. Since we last met, the projection for the revenues is up a little over $100,000. The bulk of that has been in an increase in community development revenue. Compared to budget, they're projected to be about $160,000 up for the year. I think only caveat there is just that's only slightly ahead of where we were last year. We had a budget which was equal to the prior year. Otherwise, some changes on the downside to treasurer's fees or interest income. We continue at their somewhat anemic pace. But for next year, I think in here we've got a projection of $134,000 for interest income. I think for the 2013 budget, we have about $113,000, which is lower than this year's projection. So I think we're pretty safe there. Otherwise, for the general fund operations revenue, we're projected to be at about $116,000 up. On the capital side, we have savings of $568,000, and we also have additional revenues of about $200,000. So that looks really healthy for this year. Any questions about the revenues?
Where do those revenues come from, John? The additional 2,000 some odd?
The additional 200,000, it's mostly from sales tax, because we get 50% of the sales tax.
So that's not the sales tax is up. Is that what you're saying?
Sales tax is up, but I think what we have for this year, currently year to date, is 4.9% ahead of last year. We're projecting to be 4.7%, and we're watching it closely because obviously we know without snow that there's the potential for a reduction in revenue. But right now, through September, we're 0.2% ahead of what our projection for the end of the year is.
And at one point we were 7% above, or above last year, so we were 3 percentage points or something above.
Right.
So we've kind of hit a fall in, August, September? Because it's only numbers through September, right?
Slowly crept down. And then October, November, two of the lightest months of the year.
Yeah.
December is somewhere potentially in the 13 to 14% of total range.
So October, November, because they're light months, aren't going to skew that number that much.
That's correct.
Although I would anticipate them being down from our expectation would be what I would say. But, okay.
Yes, Chad.
John, what does 1% represent relative to sales tax?
About $60,000, I think.
60.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not really very encouraged. I hear owners coming in for half the time that they were, and play it by ear. Of course, they get this big giant blizzard that we pray for. I'm certainly not encouraged that we're going to end with the kind of end of year we had last year with better snow than now, but not great snow, of course, at Christmas, and somehow sales tax revenues just, were great. I don't know if we can repeat that this year. So is there any need to make an adjustment?
I think
We go through the first quarter and then revise.
I think we stay the course at this point. I mean, it's just one of our revenues.
19% or something.
That's correct. And sure, there's some risk, there's some volatility there, but we're obviously going to be watching it and making adjustments. Our expenditure, on the expenditure side, because of the size of the capital spending, if we have, like for this year, we have about $30 million of total spending in the general fund, which $10 million is capital spending. We can make adjustments in that. I think it's this, in a worst-case scenario, on this particular sheet, it shows a 20% reduction, at least on the general fund side, is around $645,000, and that's an extreme number. We know that a couple of years ago during the recession, it went down 17%. So, and that was coming off a bad year in the stock market. We're coming off, obviously, a decent trend in both the economy and the market itself. So the conditions prior to last time's fall are substantially different than they are right now. So,
One last question, Michael.
Yes.
On that chart, general fund operations revenues, how do we determine the percent of revenue at risk? Is that a historic analysis where we highs and lows and understand the variance?
Yeah, we try to really take the kind of the worst case scenario, and we put them all together in one basket. And that's why if you did absolutely nothing, if on January 1st the world had a substantial change which affected everything, and we did absolutely nothing to adjust our spending, we would take approximately a $2.8 million hit. So we're just trying to give you an idea of the relative problems that you can have. Obviously, the $2.8 million is less than 10% of what the total overall budget is. So I think that the conditions to have that substantial of a hit have to be very precise, and it has to mean that we're not doing anything in terms of our own spending, and we know that a third of our spending is capital spending.
Thank you.
Sure.
Rachel?
Yeah, now, as I'm sure we all on the board in a community that is weather dependent for a lot of the tourism have concerns going forward, and I'm sure it's felt across the West Slope for that matter. But I know that I had concerns, and I had talked to John about it in terms of, what if we have a bad year, can we still go forward with the salary increase and things like that? And I'd probably better off handing it off to John to explain, but he mentioned that the calendar year for that, when it would really kick in, is further into the springtime. So should there be, reason to adjust at that major level, we'd have opportunities. And then also on these other capital projects, if we're just not looking like we should be doing that, we won't. And so, as you said, Jack, we get the regular quarterly reports and we all can have a sense of where we're going. And it's not as if we just let the budget run for a year without making adjustments along the way.
And Michael, do you mind if I piggyback on that? I apologize. We obviously are having some technical difficulties and are now blasting Rob with a strong beam of light there. Rachel's correct, and I also want to go back to what John said about staying the course right now. As we've seen through all the budget presentations and such that we've got a pretty complex budget on both the revenue and the expenditure side, and the way that budget balances has to do with how do revenues come in and how do expenditures go out. And historically what's happened, I think, is that the expenditure side has performed much better at the end of the year even than our projections. So I'm anticipating that we'll probably have more savings, actually, than we're projecting right now. which, if revenues don't come in because, do we have a slow November and December, that still may balance out. And so I think we need to see where that comes. And then, as Rachel pointed out, some of our larger decisions this year that are affecting our budget balance don't necessarily kick in until a little bit later in the year, and that includes our capital projects. It includes the pay and that sort of thing. And I think if we can see, we need to wait and see where are our revenues as well as our expenditures coming in. And, can we stick to the spending plan we have now, or do we have to make adjustments? I hope that the board's seen, as particularly over the past few years, that the organizations remain nimble in adjusting to whatever circumstances are getting thrown at us. Whether it be economic downturns or if we've come up with excess fund balances, to be putting those towards projects and those sorts of things. We'll continue that. The budget's a plan on the best assumptions that we can make right now, and sometimes those don't always work out. But I think to focus on just one silo of revenues and all the revenues that we have and then all the expenditures probably isn't how we should be making our decisions right now.
Yes, Rob.
Yeah, I'd probably add, if you look at 19% of our budget is sales tax revenue, the snowy year is really January, February, March, so it's 3 months. They're good months, but so are June, July, August, September, and December next year, so that's 3 months versus those 5 months. So, a drop in sales tax dollars will only be a percentage drop. It won't eliminate that 19% for those 3 months. It might reduce that 19% for those 3 months. It's the long-term trends that concern me more, like, Congress getting their act together with the rest of the powers and White House getting their act, in the White House or whatever, getting their, with the fiscal cliff that's coming up and how that affects the high-income spenders that come to our community. That I'd be more concerned with than snow this year.
And that's the advantage of waiting, is we can see, do we have a longer-term structural issue, or do we have potentially a short-term issue, which would lead us to different strategies or recommendations budget-wise.
Is it your turn, Connie? Who fixed the system?
All-powerful Dwight.
I get a secret of what we had unplugged and where the plug was.
Okay, we'll send a letter to Dwight. Thank you.
Apologize to Rob. You'll be safe to move for the next presentation.
I'm okay over here for now.
Okay.
Thank you, though.
So next we're looking at the expenditures in the general fund for 2012. And at the moment we're projecting over $300,000 of expenditure savings in the operations side. These savings are from a very wide array of line items. They're rough estimates at this point, and they're also very conservative. So at this point in the game, we're not taking every last little savings that we see. We're just taking very rough, very conservative estimates, just to give an idea where we see the trend going. The trend is in a positive direction, but as John said, we will be seeing more savings coming through as we close out the year. Right now we're looking at almost $200,000 in labor savings. Most of these savings are because of vacancies that different departments have had at one point or another through the year. But there are 2 positions that were eliminated as we were going through and looking at the 2013 budget, so positions that won't be filled. Some of the savings are in health insurance also in the labor category. In general expenditures, we have about $241,000 projected savings at this point. Again, they come from a huge array of different types of line items, everything from utilities to media advertising, professional services, and on, very different in each department. We do have $350,000 of anticipated savings budgeted for 2012. So our total between cost centers, general expenses, and labor adds up to $320,000. That's a little bit short of our anticipated savings, but again, by the time we close everything out, we think we'll have well passed the $350,000. So that's trending in a good direction. On the capital side, we're seeing more savings come through. For roads and facilities, Jack and GR are still working on finishing their projects and closing out contracts. So neither felt comfortable giving final numbers. They're still working on those, but they were able to give me some estimates of savings that they're pretty sure they will have in their projects. For the paving projects, there was a very large contract that covered 7 different roads, and GR is expecting at least $200,000 of savings from that, plus about $115,000 of savings from the Brush Creek chip seal project. Facilities projects, at the moment they're projecting $140,000 of savings, part of those from the energy efficiency projects. And then we have savings in information technology on the replacement side, and then also savings from fleet for a vehicle that's not being replaced. All totaled, that comes to about $568,000 of savings on the capital side. Any questions on the expenditures?
Ron?
Yeah, if you could further explain the $117,000 admin fee reimbursement.
Yeah.
I don't fully understand what that is and how that works into the equation here.
It's a revenue, but that we put as a contra to expenditures. That's why it's on the expenditure side, not the revenue side.
Yeah.
We take all of our internal services at the finance department, human resources, the manager's department, attorney, and we allocate these expenditures out to all of our other funds. So the airport will pay a share of the finance department for the time that we spend doing their payroll and their budget and so on and so forth. We base it on clear data. So we'll calculate the number of accounting transactions that occurred for the airport, for example, and take a percentage, and a percentage of the finance department gets allocated out. And we do that with all of the internal services departments. The revenue that comes back into the general fund from these other funds is what is there in this cost center admin fee.
So, and the way I kind of think about it, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is this is stuff that we thought we were going to bill to other departments, but we didn't bill to other departments.
That's correct.
Hence, there's
We budgeted that we
expense.
would be billing an additional $117,000 internally
Right.
to other funds that we thought was going to come into the general fund, and we didn't, or in essence, those other departments did not use the services of administration, legal, or whatever
Right.
those other allocations are. So,
And part of this is also in the finance department, we eliminated a position, and so our costs are less, and therefore we're charging out less.
okay.
So our costs are less, but then we're also bringing less back in from the other funds.
So, for instance, if the Open Space and Trails uses your time for something, you would bill Open Space and Trails Fund for something that the finance department would do as a project for them, or legal, or anything else, or the translator fund, you would bill your time to them to get money from the translator fund to support
It's
the
not a,
general fund, which pays the salary of those people.
it's not a direct billing.
Okay.
It is an allocation method. There are methodologies that are approved by the federal government, and we use these methodologies, and then it gets run through a program with a consultant that comes back with an approved cost allocation plan.
So, Rob, we have, in those items that fit into overhead, we've been talking about IT and finance and HR and admin facilities. Our costs for those, create the total pool that then gets divvied up among the various funds. And so as we've been looking at budget saving measures, we focused, on these internal services. So, finance has had a reduction in FTEs, and I think as you've been seeing, we've been tightening up on information technology and HR. And so as we spend less on that overhead, it costs our departments less in that fee. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So we've gotten more efficient.
And typically, we're not conservative in telling the other funds what we're going to charge them. We don't want them to be surprised. More often than not, but at the end of the year, there's savings. Hence, they're getting charged less. In this example, it just kind of jumps off the page, but there's really somewhere in there is corresponding expenditures are less to cover that.
George?
So can I follow up on that? So, for example, when you look at finance here, and you look at an overage of $71,000, can you explain that?
Yeah, that's taking labor savings of about $31,000, general expenditure savings of about $15,000, and then netting it with the $117,000 that we expect to get less in the cost allocation plan. So that's a net of those three numbers put together.
Oh, okay.
And
Yes, Rob? I'm sorry, Connie.
I'm sorry, it's on a different topic, so.
That's okay.
And I know I had a question, I think I missed it, so it might be skipping back, which is kind of an explanation of the downfall in the treasurer's fees, because that was a big, what's
Bankruptcies. That's foreclosures.
less foreclosures?
Yeah, and I think it's more about the reassessment.
The reassessment valuations going down.
Going
The treasurer's
down.
fees
Yeah,
is
so
primarily the
their
5%
basis has
fee that
dropped.
we charge on the collection of the tax to the various municipalities that have taxes, or the county itself, or the state, for that matter.
That's correct.
And the valuations drop, we're collecting less, so we're getting less. The 5% number is less.
That's correct.
right.
Which we're doing.
Yes.
Which we'll probably see, and I'm assuming we're anticipating going forward with our new budgets, because the information we got from the assessor's office is that we'll probably see an additional drop in valuations county-wide, which will affect the mill levies that are maxed out.
It will, but it's in more out years.
Okay.
You'll be able to see that in our 5-year plan for the general fund.
Yes, Jack?
On the allocation formula, is that not based on expenditures, not time, like we project we're going to interact in so many hours? It's a formula based on more simple thing like the expenditure.
There are a number of factors built in. For example, we will calculate the cost of providing payroll service, and then take that cost of the payroll service and divide it by the number of payroll checks that were issued for each department, for one example. So each cost is a component of many different
So
factors.
there are multiple factors in the
That's
formula,
right.
not only the
complicated.
expenditure. Yeah.
Yeah, it gets fairly complicated.
Well, being a commissioner for a few years, I'm pleased that this is occurring, even though you might see a number here. But it's efficient, and it means not only that we're doing the job efficiently, but all the things that make up that formula, the variables are becoming less, meaning we understand more about what's going on. I can remember allocations being pretty extreme in my early years, and only the last few years that we're starting to hone the numbers, as it were, and so compliments.
Anything else? Does that conclude your presentation? Yes, John? So just
one item.
10:30.
I just had one item I wanted to come back to and just make sure the board is aware of. And it's on page 2 of your memo under 2012 expenditures projects. You recall that we budgeted $125,000 mid-year for wildfire contingency as well as outreach. We didn't end up spending those funds. We are proposing here to carry those funds forward into next year so that we can go into 2013 with some funding both for potentially mitigation and prevention type of projects, maybe supporting Firewise, as well as continuing to have a contingency available should we have a wildfire and need to call in some immediate support through the Sheriff's Department. These numbers right now all anticipate carrying that forward, but it's something we hadn't talked about before. So I just wanted to call that out.
Yes, John?
Yeah, I certainly support that. The question as to how that operated, so are we saying because there's a $125,000 balance that we never had to access that? The sheriff's outreach actually went through public relations, or?
They had a budget already, for that, and we didn't
Oh, the
need
Sheriff's
to-
Department.
That's correct, and so we didn't need, we anticipated that we may have to do more. We felt like we had a good outreach program going. We didn't dip into that, and so we held those funds in case we had an event that we had to manage.
Yes, Ralph?
So the Sheriff's Department, or the department where this budget, where these monies kind of got put in reserve for, had a budget last year that met their normal expenditures, and I'm assuming they have a budget in 2013 to meet their normal expenditures in outreach, fire suppression, all of those things. I mean, the reason we allocated the $125,000 as a reserve fund was because we were confronted with an extraordinary situation regarding the weather, and there's no indication whatsoever that we're going to have that extraordinary situation next year. I do think that we need to, always have readily available funds for, emergency situations come up, but I'm not sure that we're facing the same situation in 2013 as we are 2012. So my question is, why the recommendation to hold these funds to do outreach for something that we're not sure we're going to have to do outreach for?
Well, I think there's a couple, reasons that staff was looking at. One, the $125,000 is in my budget for those expenditures, because I think you wanted, that oversight there. We have started off this year with lower snowpacks, and so we are seeing that there right now is a similar weather trend. It may not continue. However, one of the things that we were not in a good position to do last winter, so that we're already on the ground running in the spring and particularly summer, was to look at bringing both kind of, Firewise or mitigation programs to the table. And so in the first quarter, the Public Safety Council, with the Sheriff's Department and the fire districts are going to be looking at that effort for more mitigation and education where the urban areas interface, or where we have development that interfaces with wildlands and there's a fire risk. We don't know, Rob, what's going to happen, but we think if we don't prepare for it this winter, and we do have another drought situation, it doesn't leave us the time to do proper education and mitigation. We had also then continue to have some funds available should there be an event, and the board can always pull that back, but I don't think we want to be in the same situation that we were last year, where we were asking you for funds in the middle of summer so that we could react to an event, versus being able to prepare and be more proactive this winter so that if we do have another dry summer, we're ready to go. So that's really the reason.
Yes, Rachel?
Yeah, just to tag on to that, the very last presentation of the CCI conference in Colorado Springs was a presentation by a number of counties that were affected by fire last summer. And it was interesting because they had the nice mix of Colorado Springs and a fire that started the Forest Service, Larimer County, where it's along the Poudre River and different areas where they thought they had out, and then a couple more showed up, and then also Washington County as a grassland fire. And all of them could point to things they would have done better if they'd been more prepared. And that this preparedness element, I think, is really what we should take into account, whether this coming summer is a dry summer or 2 summers from now. And a lot of it had to do with incident command management training. I don't know. I'm sure John's going to evaluate whether we should send some of our staff and some of our departments for that kind of extra week training in the National Incident Command Training Center. But, mistakes that were made about how to get reimbursed from FEMA because they didn't file the right paperwork or with the right documentation at the right time, how to, do all sorts of different things. Also, as Dan Gibbs, Commissioner from Summit County, pointed out, there are matching funds available from the state if you're able to have your own local match for that sort of thinning activities, creating buffers, things like that. But given the number of different fire districts we have, which all coordinate very well together now, and then just the high potential, I think it's really important that we get out in front of this. And I think it's a penny saved, a penny spent, a dollar saved type of thing, potentially. No matter what, hopefully we have a great snow winter. We still have huge fuel loading on a lot of areas, and we have a lot of challenge to make sure people are aware of how to really use the emergency management plan. But I was particularly struck over the weekend that the fire at Rocky Mountain National Parks has not gone away yet, and it actually expanded by like 3-mile breadth in 35 minutes due to high winds on last Friday night. And they're just, they've never seen fire season go into December. But they're doing red flag warnings all up and down the Front Range now in all the drier areas. So, I just think it's about being ahead of the curve.
It's 10:35. We started a little bit late, but we're scheduled for 10:30 to end this budget hearing. So, Rob?
Just real quickly, I agree with everything you said, but it seems to me like budgeting something for that preparedness would be the appropriate way to go, as opposed to carrying over the $125,000, which was really for mitigating a major disaster if needed. Budgeting in $25,000, $50,000 on an ongoing basis for firefighter preparedness, and look at that into our 5-year budget to be expended, to be an expenditure throughout that period of time, or whatever we might anticipate wanting to expend on an annual basis. I feel a little uncomfortable holding $125,000 ready to spend on stuff that was put in place for an extraordinary circumstance. So I agree with everything you're saying, but I'm not sure $125,000 is the number.
I personally feel it's small, and that we will need an ongoing budget item for it. But I think that $25,000 or $50,000 is not going to get us anywhere, and certainly not going to be enough to pull down any grants for that type of mitigation for fuel loading. But I understand what you're saying. But I think last year's grant was more than just responding in case we have a fire. It was for fire spotters. It was for communication. It was for a number of different outreach type of programs.
Jack?
Yeah, I've come to understand the budget as having multiple components. One, the things you absolutely know about, and the things that you don't know about and you project, and the things that you keep in your back pocket to protect yourself from certain circumstances, this one being wildfire. I project, excuse me for being only a victim of what you kind of read, and I'm not a scientist, but we're starting off worse than last year. And could we ever have another March? No, but if we don't get significant snowfall by middle December, we're way behind the curve. And this is an insurance policy. It's actually maybe not enough if we had a devastating fire, but with matching funds and all of that knowledge, it puts us in a position not to take a huge impact, And when we're not talking Waldo fires here, that's beyond. But I think this is really smart thinking. And bottom line, at the end of the 2013 budget, we're going to have X amount of unallocated monies, and to add $125,000, I think if we just did away with this, you tend to start losing focus.
The direction.
We need to be on top of this. And something Rachel mentioned, and I don't know about the circumstances within staff, but we do need to do some homework if we already are not knowledgeable about those kind of grants and things, because over my time here, we've been, and I don't want to say lax, but we've been lucky and not had to face this kind of situation. And, according to the Saturday Aspen Times, No Nino has only been here since only one other time in the 50s, and that was a 3-year drought. Well, we're kind of inching towards wondering if that might be a possibility. We hope not. So I fully support this.
Okay, let's wrap this up. So the issue really is just a labeling issue, it seems to me, and we can handle that, right, John? Okay, so thank you, John. Thank you, Connie.
If I could take just a couple more minutes, I would like to briefly mention the fund balances, or would you rather move on to the budget presentation?
We have a long day ahead of us,
Okay.
and I think we're just going to... So, Connie and John, are you going to do the proposed 2013 budget and five-year
Yes.
plan?
I'm going to jump in a little bit to...
So you're going to introduce it, John? Is that what you're going to do?
I'll introduce it. So we're coming down the home stretch on developing our 2013 budget for adoption later this month. Today, we have our final wrap-up. We've gone through our 3 core focus areas, so this is the final opportunity, I think, for us to talk about decision points and, if the board wants to see any other changes. We always focus in our strategic plan, and, the only comment I really wanted to make here is that, as we've talked about in each of our last 3 meetings on the core focus areas of our strategic plan, we have budgeted funds to address in one way or another every one of the success factors that we identified. We have funding in every one of these areas. We're funding programs to move the needle in every one of these areas. And that wasn't the case when we first started. We had a couple that were missing, and so we've come a long ways there, and we look forward to this final presentation to talk about where we're at after your input and position ourselves for adoption later this month.
This pie chart shows the consolidation of the 3 core focus areas. In total, there's $73 million. It constitutes the total county budget. I think the one thing to note here is on the left side of the pie is general fund operations and general fund capital. Together, those constitute about 42% of the total budget. And I think as you look into the kind of green section there, the transit sales and use tax, which is really sales tax money that comes through us. If you were to pull that off of this chart, you would see that the actual general fund portion of the total county budget is close to 50% of the total budget. So, now, as you recall, we have 3 core focus areas: the flourishing natural and built environment. This constitutes 50%, and again, as you see in that top piece, the transit sales and use tax is 34%, and that's where, in essence, the tax comes through us, and then we pay it out to RAFTA. So that would reduce this one as being such a large component of everything. Okay, let's go to the next. Here's the livable and supportive community core focus area. It's 27%. The biggest piece of this is public safety. And the last is the prosperous economy core focus area, of which the airport dominates at 57% of the total. I think in this next year's presentation of the budget, we will probably see a little bit more of a spread. Like in the bottom piece here, the county administrator is 17%. Realistically, that gets spread amongst the other core focus areas, and I think we'll do a better job next year of understanding that these are not just finite in one space only. Any questions about these charts?
Okay, the next chart is the fund balance summary for all county funds. This is the whole county budget in a nutshell. The first column shows the fund balances that we project to start 2013 with for each of the funds. Then the next column is the revenues that we are budgeting for each fund. You'll see the $21 million for general fund operations and so on and so forth for each of our funds. We then show the expenditures budgeted for each fund, transfers between different funds within the county, and then where the fund balance will end up as a result of that budget. The next to the last column shows the net change, whether we are using fund balance or adding to fund balance for each of the funds. In general fund operations, we have budgeted to add to fund balance. There is a surplus of $328,000 for general fund operations. On the capital side, we're planning on using fund balance. We're investing in different capital projects and plan to use about $3.6 million of the capital fund balance. And then going down the list with open space and healthy rivers and streams and so on, you can see each different fund. So this shows what, unless the commissioners have any changes today, this is the budget for each fund for 2013. The final column shows a percentage of fund balance as a percent of expenditures, and this shows that we do have very healthy fund balances. The healthy fund balances give us room to react in case there are downturns in sales tax, a bad snow year, or whatever it may be. We do have some room to react because we're keeping healthy fund balances. In the attachments that you have to the presentation, you receive 5-year plans for all of the funds individually, and so you will also see the detail in those attachments that ties into these numbers on this page. Do you have any questions on this?
Yes, John?
Is this, on this page, would the $1 million transfer show up for capital?
No, that was on the fund balance page in the last presentation.
This is 2013.
So
Do we do that in the beginning of the year?
Yes.
yeah.
Okay. Got it.
So we start the year already having that transfer taking
You
place.
start.
Right. That instead of having $9.4 million in operations, we have $8.4, and capital, instead of being $4.4, it's $5.4.
Thank you.
So that was all of the county funds. Now we're just looking at the general fund. This is a visual representation of what we expect to happen with our fund balances. We expect to end 2013 with about $15.9 million in general fund balance. We do divide that up into different pots, $4 million for reserves, both the Tabor and contingency. About $1.4 million is in reserved funds. And then we have $8.7 million in general fund unrestricted funds, and then about $1.8 million in the capital fund. This chart shows the results of our 5- and 10-year plans. You can see that we take a little dip but then come back up, At the end of 10 years, what we're projecting is that we will finish at almost the same level that we started. Starting at 15.9 and ending at 15.7. So we are projecting a pretty stable fund balance in all of these areas. Any questions? Next is the general fund operations 5-year plan. It shows the revenue broken out into many of the different areas that we look at, so that we can project with different formulas for each type of revenue what we think will happen over the next 5 years. On the treasurer's fees, you can see that we are projecting in 2014 to have another drop in treasurer's fees, going from 2.7 million to 2.5 million, but then building a little bit after that. So I think it was Rob who was talking about valuations and the effect of them still going down. That's where we've built it into our 5-year plan. Down at the third line to the bottom in the green column, that shows our net surplus for 2013. We've budgeted $328,000 in surplus for the year. And then if you follow the line all the way over to the right-hand side, over the 5-year period, we have some ups and downs, but we do think we will have almost $200,000 of surplus for the 5-year period. We do have some wiggle room here, both because we have a surplus budgeted in 2013. When we come back with the numbers next week for a budget resolution, we may increase the property tax. Debbie just received the new valuation numbers, and it looks like we might have $70,000 more per year in general fund property tax with these valuation numbers. So this is a conservative look right now. It could end up being even better than this. And so we do have a little bit of room, a little bit of a cushion in case there are some revenue shortfalls, and then, of course, reacting throughout the year with expenditures. Questions?
John. Yeah, this is maybe not for Connie, but John. There's a line here under expenditures, labor, overtime, and we average 220, over 5 years or something. Well, John, why do we still have so much overtime? Is that mostly the public safety, or and maybe, hopefully, public works? But anyway.
Yeah. That's exactly where the general fund overtime is most of it is public safety, and then road and bridge, in case they're called in for huge snowstorms that will be coming our way.
And Jack, you can see how quickly that overtime budget accumulates, either in public works because of snow, obviously, but also public safety, particularly. That's a lot of how we're paying for special events to have enough boots on the ground and those sorts of things. So those, the bike race, for example, is almost $17,000 there, and
And is that considered overtime because it's over and above the normal?
Well, it meets all the Fair Labor Standard Acts to be considered overtime. Yeah.
Good, thank you.
Okay, next is the general fund capital plan. 2013 is the largest year ever in budgeting capital expenditures, with $9.7 million budgeted. The lion's share of this is in roads with some large projects. We have $2.6 million in the Airport Business Center plan, $3 million for the Highway 82 underpass, $750,000 for the Castle Creek Bridge, and then also the Frying Pan Road.
Yes, Rachel?
On the underpass, a lot of those are revenues we will be receiving and then expending.
That's correct.
From the...
That's correct. We do have... We do have about $2.5 million budgeted for in revenue that we'll be receiving. So actually the general fund share of that is $500,000.
Thank you.
And just to put a finer point that we hope to receive, we have not gotten
Yes.
confirmation, but if we don't, we would push that project.
Right.
Yeah, I appreciate Rachel's clarification. My ears were wiggling, thinking it was all ours, but, you know, in and outs.
500,000 is first.
Rob?
And Michael, just, I guess kind of just to be clear, that's in the EOTC contribution and the other government revenue grants? Is that where that revenue, that's
Yes, we have-
money that we're anticipating coming in
We
to help support that $6 or $3 million underpass, but in total,
That's right. There are CDOT funds that we're anticipating as well as EOTC. We have about 1.4 million in facilities projects, the largest facilities. Oh, I'm sorry.
But actually, this might be timely, because I was going to ask, it's kind of within the capital and everything in the 10-year plan, but we have moved over a period of time in terms of thinking about the facilities, particularly Plaza One, and held off on a lot of energy improvements till we were sure that of a space utilization plan. But I don't know, do we have budgeted somewhere in the next 10 years for the type of remodel and reuse of this facility to make it more usable? Or will that be something we find the numbers on later and then plug in?
Yeah, so on the courthouse plaza, we do have some funds budgeted next year to do some planning and potential design work so we can get a better idea of what remodels. We have a small amount budgeted right now to start the remodels.
Okay.
But it's unlikely that's going to be enough to complete them, I think, at this point. But we wanted to get a plan in place, and then we can look at, do we want to do any additional transfers of fund balance or those sorts of things.
Yeah, I was just wondering, are we setting ourselves up in such a way that at some point that Summers Roads projects will conflict with whether or not we do the renovations here? Because I know those have been put off for a long time at this point, and so I just wanted to make sure we weren't setting up a conflict, or that one year where the capital fund comes down so low. Are we?
You know, we do have about $2.5 million over a few years budgeted for the plaza building.
Okay.
Right now, those are just plug numbers because we don't know what it would cost or what would need to be done. But we have plugged that in. That may not be the full amount, but there is at least part built into this plan so that there's some room to work with.
And, you know, just for background, clearly, having moved from the anticipation of a potentially new facility or new building for county services to saying, how are we going to renovate this building to make it usable in the most efficient way for another 15 or 20 years, there is an expected cost to do that.
And I'd also point out that, as we just discussed previously, we may have additional savings in the capital plan that will add in to our fund balance that aren't yet appropriated. So each year, as we try and execute our project so that we have a little bit left over, we'll probably have additional fund balance to work with to appropriate either to roads or facilities or IT, wherever we find our needs.
Thank you.
Other questions on the capital fund? Okay. This is a summary of the general fund buy-up requests that the board has approved during our different budget meetings. We have the change in the compensation plan. We did have the compensation going from 2% and then accelerating out to 4% in the out years. We've changed that to 3% in each year of the 5-year plan, which does give us a savings of $77,000 over the course of the 5 years. There's one new position in the general fund, which is in facilities, a skilled tradesperson. And here we do expect that that position will give us savings in the capital fund as we're spending less on contracts and doing some of the work in-house. There were 2 one-time projects, a variable message sign for Road and Bridge, and then a senior summit in senior services. We have 2 positions that we've left in a pending category. We will wait to see during the year how ComDev revenues are coming in to see whether it's necessary to add in and bring these positions back to the board during the course of 2013. And then at the bottom, we have 5 different capital projects that have been built into our capital plan. The largest of these is the fleet facility update, which is addressing some safety and space issues in the fleet facility. 3 different radio tech projects and some equipment for the new software in ComDev.
Yes, Rob?
Just one small quick question. On the labor stuff that we've got, and we've got it on the next sheet here too, the health insurance average cost. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding that properly, depending on what program the employee chooses and the dependents and that sort of thing.
Right.
That cost could be as much as 30% more, or potentially...
It could be up to $29,000 if it's family insurance. It could be as low as $12,000 if it's employee only. So there's quite a wide array of costs. What we did is take the overall cost of health insurance for the county and average it out, and the $16,500 is an average
Now,
health
I'm
insurance
mistaken that in
cost.
previous budgets, we've seen the larger number,
That's correct.
and we've changed that to an average
That's
number.
right.
Yes, Rachel?
Thank you. This may have been too new to anticipate the work you've done in the budget so far, but again, at the CCI conference, there was a pretty detailed discussion of the potential cost increases to health insurance during the first few years of 2014, 2015, as Obamacare is implemented. Now that we know it will go forward, particularly it was considered to be because so many people who do not have insurance will be coming in and using their insurance policies and fixing knees and things that have been put off for a long time. And so the insurers, in pricing their policies for 2014, 2015, we're anticipating somewhere around $150 per person type of increase. At least, it's one of those go up and then flatten out type of curves because of the investment in preventative care. But is that something we had time to work into this, or we'll work into the next year's budget?
It's actually, I don't think, something that's going to hit us because we're self-insured. And so our cost to
Those
Cigna...
more general policies?
Yeah, our cost to Cigna is really about administering our self-insured plan, and then we're paying out. And so what's happening is insurers who are anticipating in their broader pool, when you're fully insured, they're anticipating increases to cover that. Right now, our coverage won't need to change as a result, and so it shouldn't drive that same demand model. And our rates are determined on our own utilization, not on a broader community. So I think what they were talking about, because I attended the same session, was for those entities that have a fully insured health plan where they're part of a larger pool. This is one of the areas where being self-insured should insulate us from that.
Thank you.
Michael,
Yes,
on that, John, as far as the work, cooperative work being done with the major employers up Valley, is there a goal of savings or, number-wise yet? Has that been developed, or is it essentially an enhanced provision of care?
So-
how's that?
Yeah,
looked at?
so, Jack, how we've defined success is not so much in terms of savings, but bending that cost curve so that it's at a less steep slope going up. And so we've reflected some of that in our budget already by bringing the out years down to
7%.
7%. Now, what we've seen is communities, and there's only a few communities that have taken on the types of efforts that we are, but what we've seen is those communities have been able to bend their cost curve down to 3% or 5%, and so we're hoping that we're going to have more room, but we had originally budgeted in the double-digit range for increases, so we're reflecting it at 7%. We've set a target of between 3 to 5% to make us sustainable in the long run as a group, but we're still working on those strategies to get there. Really, it's about decreasing the slope of increase. I don't think we're going to see it go down.
Next, we have BOCC requests from other funds. There are 2 positions that are approved for open space, an admin assistant and a land and trails manager, an internship for the airport, and then 3 airport one-time projects. We have a number of changes to our employee count for the year 2013. The changes altogether practically come out to a net zero. We do have 1.8 positions that are going away in the general fund, but then we're adding the skilled tradesperson in facilities. We are eliminating a radio tech services position, but then adding the 2 buy-up positions for open space. So for the general fund, it's a net change of minus 0.8 FTEs, and in the other funds, all combined, it's an increase of 1 FTE. Next, we'd like to highlight some of the changes that the board has suggested during the course of our different budget meetings. And the first one is detox.
And this one actually got highlighted in the paper, I believe, today. But as we discussed, we're working to put together a new partnership that really provides more of a continuum of care. And so in our previous world, that would have been what was offered through the Garfield County Jail detox and then the services of the Right Door and providing ongoing case management and such. And so what we're proposing is standing up a detox and having a continuum of care through the Aspen Counseling Center. As previously, those functions had been budgeted both through the Sheriff's Department, a small amount, but also primarily through the Healthy Community Fund. This year, there was no grant request for the detox because of the anticipation that Garfield County would close down, and then the Right Door was funded at $30,000. And so what we have proposed to get the detox and continuum of care model stood up is the $30,000 from the Healthy Community Fund that was approved by the Grant Review Committee for the Right Door, who subsequently announced that they're closing at the end of December. We've had a consistent amount of $10,600 budgeted in the Sheriff's Department and the jails budget for detox services. We have $15,000 in-kind rent. That's the value that we place on the space that we would be using at the Human Services building for a 2-bed detox unit. Again, that'd be linked with the Aspen Counseling Center. And then what we had added, the change was $75,000 one time from the general fund to allow us to make up for the shortfall that had previously been in the Healthy Community Fund. We had anticipated these would come back as grant requests in the future to Healthy Community Fund, just like we've done in the past for detox and the Right Door. So we are still working on our model. I'll be talking to you later on today about our agenda for the hospital board, but we are hopeful that we may have a joint presentation to you and the hospital board, as the hospital is a major player on what the detox models and treatment models shaping up to be.
Yes, George.
And John, we're also hoping, this is just the county's contributions, but we're also working on partnerships with the other municipalities and other entities that will be involved in this.
That's correct. And so the hospital's been a major player, both in terms of funding, but also in-kind services, both from a security perspective as well as their medical staff. We've had the municipalities at the table. They've traditionally been funding partners at different levels, and there's a commitment to continue those partnerships, as well as having the judicial district at the table. The other thing we had anticipated is we really need to look at this funding model in terms of maybe getting something that is more rational in terms of being fair and equitable to all the entities that are using it. I don't think we've stepped back and really done that for a long time, and So there's going to be some variations, but we've got a very short time frame to try and stand this up. So what we've committed to is to try and bring our historical funding, or even a little bit better, to the table in the hospitals and in the county's case, to get this stood up, and then come back and have the conversation about how do we fund this in a more equitable way in the future.
During the Healthy Community Fund grant review meeting, the board approved 3 changes to the Citizen Review Committee's recommendations. $3,000 to the Sneegas Wildlife Foundation, $9,000 for Wilderness Workshop, and $5,000 for Thompson Divide Coalition.
Yes, Rachel?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I think there was a follow-up of information on the Wildlife Foundation about their relationship with the Division of Wildlife, and Colorado Parks and Wildlife, did they approve of their work? Have we heard back from them yet, or do we have any further information yet?
I'd have to defer that question to Nan and Mitzi.
Okay, because I know we still have a little more time before we finalize the budget, but that was a question, that there was support to go forward if, again, it's at least the relationship is supported as opposed to issues.
Mm-hmm.
So we should have someone call them and find out about that.
Yes, Chad?
There was a discussion about supplementing, for example, additional monies for the Wilderness Workshop out of the general fund. Has there been any numbers arrived at, what that means?
Jack, I think there were 2 discussions. One was on Wilderness Workshop. The other was on Thompson Divide Coalition. The Wilderness Workshop funding, the $9,000 is historical. I think on the operating side, there was still some question about the future use of those funds, and so we need more discussion, I think, on the Wilderness Workshop side. On Thompson Divide Coalition, I think that is at the discretion of the board. We have the fund balance. The original request for that was $20,000, I believe.
$10,000 for Thompson Divide.
Oh, I
and $20,000
apologize.
for
I had those
Wilderness
reversed. So $10,000 for the coalition to participate in a study. I do think in talking to particularly the attorney's office, who's been interfacing most with the Thompson Divide Coalition, the one recommendation that we'd have, regardless of whether the board wanted to look at a $5,000 or $10,000 amount, would be, instead of giving that directly to the Thompson Divide Coalition, would be for us to be a participant in the contract and the study and pay that directly to the contractor, so that we have some opportunity to shape the scope and also receive the same results as a participant in the study. It's a little bit of a nuance. As far as does the $5,000 make a significant difference in terms of whether that project is going forward or not, I don't think we've had a good indication that it would, but they'd still like our participation. So I don't know if I've muddied the waters more for you.
No, that's fine. It's, what it is. What it is. Yeah, that's a better way to put it. But I think it's important to understand what pools of monies are coming out of, and I support the general fund pools, but those are things we've done historically. For example, funding the air quality study out of either ComDev and the attorneys, or both, or somewhere there. But I think it's important moving forward, as this conversation evolves, that Wilderness Workshop, for example, ought to know where they're asking funds from. Healthy Community Fund, now this is historic, the monitoring, we've always done that, though the number might have grown, that's reality. But the other expenditure, the other monies they wanted, that probably shouldn't be applied for through Healthy Community Fund. I think it doesn't help us in our discussions, for example, with the city of Aspen about, oh, well, you didn't fund it here, but you're going out of your general fund. What I'm saying here is that there needs to be an understanding on both sides of the table about what they're applying for at what funding source within our multiple pieces of our budget. Because I think we can get sideways by having it thrown up in our faces, well, you're funding this out of general fund. No, we're not matching something or doing something different than we've done before.
And that's one of the things, Jack, that came out of our budget discussions in particular this year was when we were looking at various entities, not just these entities that request money from the county. Sometimes they're coming, because we provide different avenues, they're coming through multiple avenues. And so staff has been working on just kind of a better tracking and decision matrix to make sure we understand, are we getting requests from multiple avenues, and do we want to consolidate those into, maybe it's more appropriate in the Healthy Community Fund, or maybe it's more appropriate in the general fund, so we can have those discussions.
Yeah, and that's going to be an evolving discussion, so thank you.
Yes, George.
Can I want to backtrack, unless someone else has a question on this.
Backtrack how far, George?
Not far. The changes to the county FTEs. Didn't we approve a restructure for the IT and to create a new position there? And is that not reflected anywhere?
That was a net, because we had what we're doing is we're taking the communications director position and converting that to, so I guess we could have reflected that as a plus and minus.
It's in here, though.
But it nets out the same, and so that is something that we're moving forward with, but it was no real net change.
Okay, thanks.
Michael, on that note, why isn't it noted here as a plus and then a minus?
We could have done that. I guess that was maybe
that would have been consistent
because we took that position, we did convert it. So when we bring the budget back for adoption, we can note that. It is in the table of organization that's in the budget. It is noted that way with a decrease at the comm director position and an increase for chief technology officer.
Okay.
With the 2012 budget, we began to phase out the transfer from Resource Recovery Fund to the General Fund. In 2011, the transfer was $270,000, but we reduced that by $50,000 in 2012. And the original plan, as you'll see in the first line of the table, is that we were going to continue reducing that transfer by $50,000 every year. During the Natural and Built Environment Core Focus budget meeting, the board suggested accelerating that reduction by an additional $30,000 every year. So option number 1 shows what that looks like. It would be $140,000 in 2013, going to the point where it's 0 in 2016. As we were looking at both the General Fund 5-year plan and the Resource Recovery 5-year plan, we felt that we could accommodate eliminating that transfer altogether as of 2013. General Fund operations had enough room in it, enough surplus, that we could do without that revenue. And it gave more room to work on solutions for the Resource Recovery Fund by getting rid of the transfer right off the bat from 2013. So the 5-year plans that you see in this presentation are using option number 2, the total elimination of that transfer. But this is a decision point for the board that we can put it back to option number 1 or any other variation thereof.
Yeah, and We decided to reflect the numbers with option number 2, one, because from the general fund perspective, that creates the worst case. But as you'll recall, we have a history of subsidizing recycling with our fees from other waste streams. With the downturn, obviously, we haven't had the same level of waste streams, so it's been more difficult to subsidize. This creates a little bit more room. Time-wise, we still would be in a deficit position, but it gives us a little bit more room, a little bit more time to try and adjust our operations and such at the landfill, and it just seemed like the right thing to do if we were in a position to eliminate that transfer altogether. The landfill is still paying the admin overhead fees, as they should, as an enterprise fund that we discussed earlier. These are different.
So how does the board feel about that? Yes, Rob?
Just a question. I guess my concern is, when does this come back to us for like further review, and you know, it's kind of a quick decision to all of a sudden make this change at this point, as opposed to having a work session on this. I mean, I think we were kind of, when we were discussing this, we were kind of tossed back and forth with what to do 2 months ago or whatever.
Well, I think there's probably 2 issues. One, we've historically had this transfer from the landfill fund into the general fund, which is no longer sustainable. And so we're just suggesting we're in a position, we've put ourselves in a position to eliminate that, and the staff's, our recommendation, my recommendation, that we eliminate that. Then I think we need to have further work session time on the recycling program and the future finances of the landfill. And so that would be something that we would be doing this next year to try and figure out what our alternatives are, strategizing with the board about which alternative makes most sense to maintain the service levels that we want to have at the landfill and to make them sustainable. But what we do know is, you know, this transfer has been in existence for quite some time. I think we can tie it back to some expenditures and improvements that have, you know, been made, like Jack Reddick Road and those sorts of things. But really beyond that, we weren't seeing the nexus of having this transfer, and we have a landfill fund now that's struggling to match revenues with expenditures. It made sense to eliminate this.
And the key thing that I heard there was that it's no longer sustainable, but I think I would add to that and say it's no longer sustainable under the current model, which means, you know, when does the discussion happen if we want to or should change that model? And it sounds like that's what I was asking for. Is there going to be discussion about that in the early part of next year, saying, well, okay, this is the changes we made for the budget. Now let's look at the model of the way the landfill operates. Right. And since we've had to make this budgetary change because of its sustainability to support those expenditures that come from the general fund, you know, now let's look at the model of the landfill and what's the right thing to do there in terms of creating a model that goes forward into the future.
Right, and we're in the process of hiring a new director for the landfill, and so, you know, I think we need to have time to bring that person on board to evaluate and help us figure out what those appropriate strategies are, and then work with the board. What this does is it really gives us through 2014 to you know, identify and implement a solution, and so we think that's the right move right now. And then this next year, as we bring that key staff on board, we'd be coming back, and I wouldn't anticipate, Rob, probably given that we're bringing a new person on and there's going to be a learning curve, you know, that's going to be kind of an end of second quarter, begin of third quarter kind of issue to bring back to you guys.
Yes, Rachel?
Yeah, you know, I have to say I'm kind of glad to see that we can eliminate this transfer now rather than continue to kind of taper off. And, you know, the background is there really wasn't justification for that transfer to the general fund other than that the general fund needed it. You know, it wasn't you know, really for services, as you said, other than Jack Reddick Road, maybe recently. And I agree with what you're asking about, Rob, in terms of the new business model or potential models that we get to choose from. But to me, I want to see, and I've mentioned this to John, but a real breakdown of those recycling costs. You know, how much labor in the sorting? Do we need to sort 5 days a week? How much labor in the trucks picking up? Do we need to pick up as many times? You know, really getting down to cost to see how we can create that as a sustainable program. And as we've seen in a couple years' worth of presentations on recycling, you know, it may simply be that it's not in that format, and that we've moved from the whole reduce, reuse, recycle mode to people are just like, hey, recycling's free, I can use as much as I want over here. And are we really getting the net effect of what you're supposed to have a recycling program? But even beyond that, when we've had discussions before, and I think these discussions will be much more fruitful in the future when we've looked at new business models and really can show the expense more clearly on each component of that program. But when we've talked to the city or other people where we provide recycling pickup to say, would you like to help support that, they always ask, yeah, but why are you transferring $250,000 a year out of that fund to the general fund? Don't tell us it can't support the recycling program when you're bleeding it on the other side. And so I think this will put us in a better position to actually create a program that is sustainable in the long term and on the right footing initially. So I'm okay with it, and you know, if the general fund needed it desperately, I would say no to this and go to the option one. But if we're comfortable moving forward too, we'll move forward too. I can.
Board? Yes, Jack?
Yeah, I'm actually thrilled to see this happening because it really says several things about how we are doing business as an organization. I think we're structurally, from the financial perspective, becoming stronger, more efficient, as shown with the $117,000 in cost allocations even and all of that. But really, this goes back originally to, I think, the early 2000s when that downturn after the tech fall, etc., and when we went out to the public for help with the Healthy Community Fund because that component of our needs was not sustainable and the budget was in trouble. Well, structurally now we've arrived, I think, at a point where we can do this, and funds, sections, department, we need, and enterprise funds in particular, need to live within their own means. And I look at the future as being very challenging with solid waste and recycling. Fuel is not going to get less expensive. Labor is not, and insurance is not going to get less expensive. But we must provide this service. But one of the revenue streams that we had in the quote-unquote boom years of construction materials, tearing down major, complexes, all of that, we're in a new norm now, so we can't expect that. This is right, and most appropriately, it is right for the board in a timely manner to start understanding what is the business model that we need to evolve there. So I agree with all of that.
Rob or George, do you want to agree with it?
I agree with that.
Okay, so we'll go ahead with zeroing it out.
Next, there was a change in elections. The elections department had brought forth a buy-up request for a position, but then felt like with a little bit of restructuring within their department, they could find ways of doing without that position. The board agreed during that meeting to have mail-in ballots for 2013 and the off-year elections. And then there was discussion on the board minutes, and Janice will be working on coming up with a solution for the board minutes that is not just action only, but maybe would save time for the full minutes. So there will be a work in progress during the year on coming up with a solution that is fitting for both the board and for the elections department.
And we have made some changes to the housing budget. If you look into the expenditure section, the board had expressed some concerns about the amount of money in the buy-down line that currently shows $6 million. Projected, we previously had $10 million in there, and we've pushed $4 million down to the partnership line, which is now $8.6 million. And even since our last meeting, we've had a very encouraging meeting with some potential partners that we hope to be coming back the first part of next year and talk to you about. So partnerships are out there. We're encouraged and hope to see some things happen.
Okay, board?
Very good.
And
Yes,
comment or question? Well, and having just heard what we heard, we can always advance monies and reallocate if a partnership becomes really ripe. And we don't, we're way into that, meaning the next year's board, we can evolve there instead of doing the buy-downs. It's a balancing act, and you all will.
Yeah, Jay, I think that's a good point, because really we're just starting to mature into, spending funds and building a portfolio of options. And so I would anticipate that we're going to have opportunities come our way, and we'll have to just be agile. The good news is we've got the fund balance sitting there, and the board has the opportunity to adjust appropriations to opportunities that they would pursue.
Okay, next steps, we are just about at the end of our budget process. Next week, we will bring back the first reading of the budget resolutions, which establish the expenditure appropriations and then revenue and expenditure budgets. And then on December 19th, we have the second reading and also the mill levy certification. Again, this is the budget for all of the county funds. We believe that we've presented healthy budgets that leave sufficient fund balance and that are sustainable over the long run. And if there are no other questions, that is the end of our presentation.
Yeah, a question on the Tabor Reserve and contingency.
Mm-hmm.
Tabor Reserve is a formula?
That's correct.
Because that number has grown over the years.
It's 3% of certain revenues.
Certain general fund.
Yes.
Well, it's right now we account for that Tabor Reserve in all funds. So the Open Space and Trails Fund will have a Tabor Reserve. The Healthy Community Fund has a Tabor Reserve.
Mm-hmm.
The General Fund does.
And that's how the sum total has actually, in my mind at least, growing.
What you see here, the $642,000, is only general fund Tabor Reserve. In the other funds, we did not pull it out as a separate line. It's just combined into the total.
Of the 642.
No,
No.
the 642 is only general fund.
So look at open space or airport.
Yes. So for open space, the $3.6 million in their fund balance, part of that is a Tabor Reserve.
And we just, in the spreadsheet, quite frankly, got so busy if we put all those reserves in for all the funds, but we do calculate that for each fund, and each fund has that Tabor Reserve.
Now, is there such thing as Tabor and Healthy Community Fund?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Because it's a revenue stream approved
That's
by
correct.
the
And it's a separate fund. Yeah, and the other thing I'd point out, just to build on what Connie was saying, this is, these are very responsible fund balances. I usually cite for you guys the Government Finance Officers Association, which recommends that entities maintain 15% of fund balance to appropriations, and you can see, overall we're at 95% with 51% in our general fund. That is a very responsible amount. I think it makes sense. You increase that amount as you see, your potential, risk to revenues and such, which as a tourist-based economy and such, we have some elasticity where it expands or contracts, or can expand or contract pretty quickly, and we depend on the weather, which is also always difficult to predict. And so we think this is, very responsible, very healthy. It gives the board room to deal both with downturns or really significant unexpected events. So we're open to any comments, questions, or additional changes that the board might want to discuss.
Board? Yes, Rachel?
I did have a question, and I was kind of fumbling through my different pieces of my budget proposal to find it. I don't think it's in our summaries today. But what is our annual general fund transfer to the housing office? Because I know we can't use our mitigation funds for that. And it's half of the cost of operating the office.
I don't have the number with me at the moment.
It's about 160,000, isn't it, somewhere in
I
there?
think it's I was going to say just under 200,000. We can get that certainly for you. It changes a little bit
Based on
each year,
sales
depending
and
on
revenues.
operation. Yeah, exactly, and what the gap is. But we're right around,
200,000.
yeah, a little bit under.
Thank you.
Yes, Jen?
Yeah, and I apologize for being redundant, and I'm looking at all the funds for Tabor, and, that number is within the fund balance. Is there, but I have to ask this, does the transit sales and use tax have a Tabor?
I believe it does, but I'd have to ask Tom
I
Oaken to
never
make sure.
realized that. Yeah, so actually, and it's a very small piece of
That's
these
right.
numbers, but these are not all available funds for operations, as it were, or they are all available with that one exception.
Right.
That's the better way to put it. Okay.
And of course, different funds have different policies. With open space, they have their different pots where they set aside part for trails and part for acquisitions and so on.
So, board, do we want to move this forward? Yes, George?
Yeah, I'll just make some comments. I think, first I want to compliment staff and all the department heads that really worked through this process. Again, I think it went very smoothly this fall. For me, it was very understandable. And I think similar to the 2012 budget, again, as has been noted, I think this is, again, very fiscally conservative. We maintain a very healthy fund balance and a reserve fund balance. We're still able to allocate dollars for the continued capital projects, roads and bridges, facilities, IT. It still allows us the flexibility to adjust and shift resources to increase our efficiency. And so, I think it's, and finally, I think it reflects our commitment for maintaining a highly qualified and professional staff through recruitment, retention, and training development. So I support this budget, and thank you all for all your hard work.
Thank you, George. Any other comments? Yes, Rachel?
Well, I certainly would ditto everything that George has just said, and I think we should nominate John and Connie and John to go to Washington, D.C. and straighten out this whole fiscal cliff matter.
I don't think I'd want that job.
So, board, are we ready to move this forward?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and
Thank
thank
you.
you for all your hard work, attention, and time spent in what I know can be long, even though I promised them to be entertaining meetings. I'm not sure they always are.
So, John, this is an unanticipated early termination of this. So should we go on to something else at this point? Memos of interest? Board, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I would continue on.
Yeah, let's see, I think we have Brian in the room, and all right, it's taking my,
Oh, Brian left a little while ago.
is he still here?
No, someone put his coat on.
Yeah, we can move the veterans request. So maybe we can work through those that we don't need staff for. Michael, and we can hold the rest.
Okay.
Michael?
Rob.
Just to note, the set thing on our schedule, which isn't going to be able to change, is the executive session, because we have people coming in for that, which is at 3:15. So the more we get ahead, we have to come back
later.
at 3:15 anyway,
Yeah,
which
maybe
I'm
we just make
just
a
knowing.
long lunch.
There are a couple items I can cover with you if we go into it separately.
Separate from those people?
Separate from there, yeah. Okay, so the first memo of interest is the Roaring Fork Veterans History Project. They have a request in front of you for $2,000 to continue the interview project that they have with local veterans. Right now, the board, after the partial refund that was granted last week to the Komen Foundation, has $3,700 remaining in your discretionary fund.
The question last time, John, was, I think, how much we'd given in the past, and what was the Rob, you had some concerns about it. Historical donations to the Veterans Fund, was that it?
And some of this information was added, but the other question that was raised too was, should this not be a request to the Healthy Community Fund or some other permanent thing? And I think the discussion among our board is, the basis of this discretionary fund and having a, last year we put $500 towards this. So is it a reoccurring thing that's always going to come out of our discretionary fund? And if it is, my opinion would be to move it somewhere else in our budget versus it's not discretionary if it's a regular item being requested of our discretionary fund.
So, board, how do we want to handle this?
Yeah, this is a request at this point. I think going forward, I think that's a good suggestion, Rob, because and I support this project. It's just a tremendous project. I really enjoy watching these interviews and learning about the citizens in our community that have served. My concern is we've given $500 and now there's a substantial increase in the requested $2,000. And is that something that we're going to see down the road? This is where else are they getting their funding from, and where are the other partners involved? That's sort of a bigger picture. So, and in the past, we've always, we're almost at the end of the year now anyway, we're always, if we have dollars at the end of the year, we've given them to support some of those in dire need. And last year we had this real emergency that came up with a fire down in Basalt, and we were able to contribute a substantial amount of dollars for those. So we still have a few weeks left, and so I would suggest we contribute X amount of dollars, I'm not sure where, and hold some dollars back till the end of the year and see how we want to finish our allocation of the remaining dollars and make sure we haven't got a last-minute emergency from the community.
So the historical is $500. Are you comfortable with $500 donation?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Rachel?
Yeah, I agree with the general premise. I think that Rob and George are putting forward that, to see a request like this, it's more usual to see the full budget, to see what other funding partners there are, who else is contributing, what's being privately raised, kind of even what's the rate that grassroots is charging. You kind of get the sense from here that it's $200 an interview because they have another 2 people and 10 people. But it doesn't give you an idea of the scope of, is it another 50 people over the next 5 years, is another 5 people, and we'll feel, quote, relatively done. What is the Historical Society putting in, who are also kind of the archivists? And I realize that some will be in kind as opposed to cash contributions and so on. But it is awkward when there's requests outside of the normal process and it doesn't get vetted with the other agencies in terms of, how are they really being used after the fact and how often are they being broadcast? And, a lot of just the broader information I think would be helpful. I am very supportive of the project, and, I was thinking of a number larger than the $500, to give them encouragement towards this. I was thinking of either $1,000 or $1,500, and that would still leave, somewhere between $2,200 or $2,500, in the contingency fund. But, so in general, I guess I'm saying I support it, and I can see doing a larger contribution. It sounds like 1,000 would be 50% of what they need to do for these these new interviews, these 10 new interviews.
So we have a range of 500 to 1,000. Jack?
Yeah, I think the idea as a discussion point about how this relates to the Healthy Community Fund is a good idea, just so we kind of air it out. But when I think of who is doing this project and managing it and trying to do the work, they don't have the ability to do a Healthy Community Fund grant process and, all of this stuff. So, and I'm sensitive to that, and that actually either they're going to have to rely totally on volunteers or have a professional do a grant. So that would cost some money. I'm inclined to believe that I'm okay with the vets, the history project coming in, kind of making a request here, but I could never support the $2,000 request, for example, and that does not mean that I do not support what they're doing. I absolutely want to fund it. But for me, I really appreciate and am very proud of what we've done year after year. At the end of the year, reaching out, and this is kind of the holiday season, as it were, reaching out to those most in need, the homeless shelter and the food bank. And I like what we did last year of the 1,500 to 1,500. And so that would leave me, and some might think this is premature, but I'm kind of advancing an idea, that would leave us with $702 for this project, and I'd be comfortable with that number. But I really am focused on those in the greatest need. The history project, it's wonderful, and I agree with George, and what we see on grassroots, that's fabulous. But those in need, that's goal. It's not history, it's a day-to-day trying to, live on a day-to-day basis. So that's where the majority of the money would go for me.
So we've heard 500, 1,000, and we have a median figure, which is about 700. Rob?
I really agree with Jack's philosophy there. The fact that we gave $1,500 to the homeless shelter and the food bank last year, with our remaining balance of $3,700, it would be nice to be able to continue that. I also like the idea that George, barring some sort of disaster that puts other people out there, and we don't have to balance this out until our last meeting. But I would like to go in the direction of being prepared to do the 1,500, the 1,500, and the 700.
So we have 2 for 700. Let's make it 3 for 700, and we'll go from there.
Done.
Okay. The next item, and I guess we can see what questions you have. We may have to wait for GR, but actually we've got Tom Oken in the audience. I wonder if we want to go up ahead to the investment policy.
Yes.
MOI.
So exciting.
Tom, are you prepared to do that?
Sure.
Great, thank you.
Like an explanation, or are there questions?
Well, let's start with questions. Jack?
Yeah, I'd like to define, in the background portion, first paragraph, you talk about, and you're quoting, U.S. agencies and instrumentalities and securities. So securities, with regard to this memo, is specifically related to negotiable certificates of deposit, or does securities mean stocks, those kind of things?
Securities, as authorized in this section of the law, would be anything that is fully guaranteed by the U.S. government. And I'm not aware of any stocks that are fully guaranteed by the U.S. government. But in this case, the FDIC does cover up to $250,000 of an investment in a CD. So that's the security we're talking about.
Rachel?
Yeah, I'm supportive of this request. I appreciate your memo and explaining it to us. I just have to say I'm finding it so hysterical to look at the financial section in the Denver paper and see the banks trying to make a really big ad that says, our 5-year CD will pay you 0.93%. And the big arrow up here, and theirs only pays 0.25. Watch your money grow with us. And it's like, but they're trying to make something out of nothing to attract some investment with these interest rates so low. So I appreciate your being diligent in finding whatever small percentages you can for our portfolio.
Any other questions, board? Yes, Jack?
Yeah, and so, Tom, the advantage here would be we could go to different institutions and negotiate like we had been previously, but this gives us more flexibility. You know, like without
Access
bank,
to
we used
more institutions, yeah. Otherwise, we are limited to approved public depositories for Colorado. They're primarily banks located in Colorado or that have a branch here and that are regulated. And in order for us, when we do purchase a CD from one of those banks in Colorado, they have to pledge collateral against it, and that's how we're secured over and above the insured limit. But because of that, their rates tend to be lower than some other bank nationally. And as well, we've reached the point that we go out to bid monthly for CDs, and there are no Colorado public depositories currently bidding. So there's no one for us in Colorado. We've pretty much exhausted the banks here. There aren't, it's not every bank in the U.S. that issues negotiable CDs. It's mostly large ones that are doing that. But there's some interesting names, like Bank of China has a U.S. branch that qualifies for FDIC insurance. I kind of went, oh yeah? So there will be some interesting names on the list that we invest in.
Just full of questions here, I guess. Okay, so now we would expand the possibilities of different institutions, and does that mean that you would do research and due diligence about the credit worthiness of the banks? You know, there's that ratio of assets to debt and all of that. Do you do all that personally? Or?
No, for these banks, we're relying on the fact that they're insured. We would not exceed the $250,000 insured limit.
Okay.
I'm good. So, yeah, we're not doing.
Are you good with investing with the Bank of China, Jack?
No.
Okay.
I say I'm maybe prejudiced without a lot of information on that, but there must be a lot of good, solid U.S. banks we can go to.
So would the board be comfortable with U.S. banks? Or would you be comfortable with a U.S. or a China bank?
I'd be hard to tell.
As one of the
Well, I think to the best of our abilities, my preference would be to find a U.S. bank to invest in. I mean, I'm not gonna tell people that I want to invest in a Chinese bank. Yes.
Yeah, I look at this as a decision about the type of instruments. I think that it's up to our Treasurer's Department to look at all the banks and figure out which will be the best rates for the community. But I think without incredibly deep investigation that the U.S. has already done by allowing them to sell those securities, we might find out that any bank that we think of as has a nice solid U.S. name, Colonial Penn Institution or something, is actually owned 50% by the Chinese. And so, I mean, how deep do we want our investigations to go about who owns what banks in a world of globalization? And so, I take your comment very seriously. I'm not dismissing it, and I think that sort of investigation should go forward. But is it a bank owned by Goldman Sachs? Been better for the U.S. and treated the U.S. better than others? There's an irony when people always talk about the U.S. debt, much of it being purchased by China. Of course, the U.S. is the single largest buyer of that debt, and the second largest, I think, is Japan, or they're right up there on the list, so it's not all China. But it shows a certain faith in the U.S. that they're selling our treasuries for us to their own people and others. So, I'm not going to make a knee-jerk reaction on the title of the name of the bank, but I trust our treasurer to look at all of them and, again, find the best portfolio rates for us.
Well, that's different from a U.S.-owned bank. So all I was suggesting was with some research that we try to invest in U.S. banks. I didn't want to make it overly complicated, but I think there is available research and available banks that we can look at, and I'm just not interested in getting a 0.01 better interest rate from China than I am from the U.S.
Well, are Swiss banks okay? Are French banks okay? Are German or?
I said U.S. banks. So
okay, so only U.S. banks. Is that?
That would eliminate several off the list who are the highest yielding. There's Bank of Japan, Bank of India. There are actually two forms of that. So basically what these are is, they may be owned, and they may actually be a national bank, but they have a U.S. branch that is operating in the U.S., making loans here, which actually is the benefit, and the reason they're looking for deposits is so that they can make loans within the U.S. here. So from that point of view, I mean, for the national economy, that's beneficial when a lot of our big banks aren't
not
making loans
here.
If you would, I'd like to not be limited. It will limit our returns. I mean, there are only, it takes several banks because you can only put $250,000 with a single bank. So we typically, invest in $1 million quantities. So we have to find at least 4 banks just to do $1 million.
So, board?
I would just say U.S. regulated banks.
Yeah,
And
I
they're operating here, and they're regulated under the same guidelines that the
And they're
banks are.
insured here.
They're FDIC insured
here, and they're
They're
FDIC
subject to
insured.
U.S. regulation.
my preference would be stated as if the policy would be to try to invest in banks that are based in the United States. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm going to go there and leave the discretion with staff. But, when you're looking, you can do some quick analysis, I'm sure, about ownership. And so, we have discretion here. And how much money are we talking? $3 million? $10 million, according to timing, I guess, of the year, right? What part of the year?
Yeah, probably $10 million if we could get there. I'm not sure there are enough
Oh, that'd only be 25
out there. That
banks.
would be.
George?
that would be 40 banks, and right now there aren't 40 different banks on the list that I've seen.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with Rob's suggestion, as long as they're U.S. regulated banks. I mean, the dollars that go to these banks, as Tom has said, for the most part, or all, stay in and reinvest in the country.
Rachel?
Yeah, I'm going to agree with that, and, I think that, unless I have this wrong from the premise of the beginning of the conversation, local banks and Colorado banks have already been used up in terms of hitting that safe $250,000 deposit level. And so we're no longer talking about whether we're doing business with this money in local banks as much as we're at national bank level. And so if it was a discussion about do we take it out of local banks for a quarter of a percentage point or something, or less, I think that would be a different discussion than watching out for other earning opportunities on the taxpayers' money. And so at that level, I support the U.S. regulated banks and fully insured.
So it looks like U.S. regulated banks. Let's go from there.
Okay. Other questions?
Yeah, I wish we could get 0.25% instead of the difference of. A little facetious.
Any further questions for
I
Tom?
can get 0.9 from State Farm.
Tom, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
State Farm is a bank, Tom, right?
Yeah, I don't know, but I haven't seen them on the list of brokered CDs. So. Yep.
So, John, what else can we...
So we had skipped over budget supplemental request. I can see if I can answer any questions the board has. If I can't, Rob, wait for GR or Brian. But basically we have what turns out to be a net zero request. It's really moving between different projects. As you know, we had an exceptional number of road projects and capital maintenance projects this year. As often happens, some come in above where we expected them, some come in under where we expected them, and really what this is moving funds between those projects to balance out. We had savings, particularly on Redstone Boulevard and Brush Creek Road. We're looking at adding in for purchase services, which is really design and engineering work. Contingency, the major portion of that was the unexpected work we had to do on Snowmass Creek Road. And then Woody Creek Road, GR had come in and during open discussion and visited with you that we needed $185,000 to complete that. $185,000 to complete that retaining wall project, which is where the $50,000 extra comes in. These are all within what we had anticipated budget-wise and are still consistent with what you just heard from Finance about where we expect to end the year.
So, do we want to go ahead with this? Yes? George, yes?
Yeah, my only comment is, and I don't know if Gio's going to show up, but because we may have a delay with the finishing of this project at Snowmass Creek Road, depending on any litigation or whatever, I did hear from some of the residents up there, and they were concerned that we make sure that we have really closely monitoring that section that tends to be very icy, to make sure that stays sanded, and we're just aware of the safety concerns there as we move through the winter.
Yeah, and I can definitely pass that on, and I know we're trying to get it to completion, but it's difficult right now. So.
Yes, Jack?
Yeah, I can recall last year, beginning of this year, George talking about some culvert work in, was it East Snowmass Creek? Was that ever... Yeah, it never showed up on the radar. It might have been just a maintenance item, but it seemed something was bigger than just, some maintenance work.
Well, Silver's Creek, there was a culvert replacement a year ago.
Oh, that wasn't this year.
We completed that, and then what I recall, Megan brought up there, thing about some of the patching work, on West Oprus, I think it was, wasn't it?
West
Oh,
Orange,
way up.
which they've done.
Yeah. So we've
Yeah, so
completed that.
you're,
Yeah.
to your knowledge, we're good.
Yeah.
We've got that done.
Okay. And then the last MOI is the Ashcroft ski touring update, which was an update that was required as a condition. My internet connection's catching up with me here.
I'm having trouble with that too. I don't know what it is, but it's not working.
If there are any questions on this, I'll probably have to defer to when Susan's here. Suzanne.
Michael?
Yes, Jack.
Yeah, I really don't have a question, it's just a comment, and this item, of course, you're talking about is an update from Suzanne about the Ashcroft ski rec master plan. The only thing I'd like to reinforce, because when you read John's letter, you know, he's very hopeful for investors or a sale, etc. But regardless of what occurs, I hope he has the strong message that he must, or someone must, complete the housing units by the end of 2013. And I mean, that's the bottom line of this whole memo as far as I'm concerned. We need to reinforce that with John. Thank you for the letter, and remember.
Yes, George.
Yeah, I mean, just to follow up on that, I just wonder if John has actually done any preliminary plans, because that whole process takes some time, and if not, are we going to get to this point next year, and then what? I mean, what are sort of the consequences? I mean, like we had this discussion before, but how do we hold his feet to the fire? And
I think you keep the fire burning essentially permanently, and his feet to that fire permanently. That's the way it's been. This is a process that's been ongoing for 10 years, minimum. And so I don't really know what to do with this, quite frankly, because I've actually lost faith in John's ability to live up to his representations. Yes, Rich?
Well, not commenting on all the process per se, because you've been involved with it longer myself, I support Jack's recommendation that we send a thank you for the report letter, and just to be clear, here are the commitments that will need to be fulfilled by the end of 2013, and list those, and good luck and a good season. But you can't take preemptive action on someone who still has a timeline to run, and just to let them know we're concerned about that timeline because of past extensions and past grace that has been granted on this, that we're anticipating that the full master plan commitments will be completed in a timely fashion.
Michael?
Yes.
Yeah, and I would quote, Aspen Ski Touring expects to get U.S. Forest Service approval for the plans for these units. So, within the body of that friendly thank you letter, as it were, we ought to specifically ask George's question about, in anticipating getting that approval from the Forest Service, have you done planning so the board gets a response for the next step?
Okay.
That's okay with the board? Okay.
And Michael, that's it, I believe, on memos of interest. And so I don't know if the board wants to continue on to open discussion, or if you'd like to take a little longer lunch break.
Board?
I have a question. I never saw our future agendas in this packet. Does anybody else get it?
We have it in our paper packets.
Oh, I never.
Oh, you didn't?
It didn't show up on the download
Website?
on the website. Did you get it, Michael?
No.
No. So
You're right, I don't have it on my website either. We
But
can get a-
anyway, back to your question, Michael, I'd be happy to continue for open discussion for another 20 minutes or so and sort of keep on schedule there.
20 minutes,
Or I'd be happy to-
open discussion, or future agendas, or board membership reports, or, yes, John?
Well, I'll look at future agendas here. There doesn't appear any work session time for a discussion about board appointments, or committees, for example, CCI, et cetera. Because we usually did have a little piece of, a discussion about what's proposed, and even though we have a new commissioner, for example, when I came on board, well, there was a discussion.
And actually, Susan and I talked about getting those added on. I can't, unfortunately, pull up my future agendas right now. Yeah.
Yeah, I can understand that. But anyway, that's just a heads up. Well, do we want to have a discussion before the transition in preparation for the approval, because it's on the agenda? Okay, a second one, Michael? I was under the impression that my last day was the 9th. The agenda here does say January 8th, a Tuesday, the oath of ceremony, so we've
That's
we've now
statutory.
clarified that?
Yeah.
Perfect.
One extra day off, yeah.
Yeah, I'm ready either way.
Any other future agenda items?
Do you want to care to look at
Yeah,
this
I
quickly?
haven't got one, but Michael doesn't have one. You don't have one, John, so.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's no further future agenda discussion due to many circumstances.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like much.
The board has not had an opportunity, Michael, to do membership reports in quite some time. We've had to skip those. I don't know if we want to get a head start on getting through those.
Okay, membership reports?
Well, we had the presentation from Northwest COG the other day, and we have our end of the year meeting this Thursday. I'll be down in Minturn for that on Thursday, where we'll be finalizing and approving, hopefully, our budget. I've got the draft budget, and if anybody's interested, I can forward it via email. You can just email me, and I can forward it to people. That's really it for that and RRR.
Core?
Let's see, Core, we're going to plan a retreat here sometime early next year and talk about some longer-term policy issues that have been discussed here from the REP grants and to also looking at some opportunities to broaden the scope of Core and to look at some partnerships. Eagle County's organization, similar to Core, is very interested in becoming part of, under the umbrella of Core, or a partnership, and looking at some ways to address energy efficiency and opportunities throughout the valley, since we're a tri-county in the Roaring Fork Valley. So we're going to be discussing that as well.
Okay. John?
Yeah, just some feedback, George, for a board member. My homeowners association, Creekside Homeowners, are working with CORE to do a major insulation project, et cetera, and plus all the Energy Smart, the $50 evaluation. And just compliments to, I know Marty and Tyler specifically have been involved, and these guys have done a tremendous job. We're ready to actually this week do this like $22,000 project. So compliments to how it's working on the ground.
Yeah, one of the discussions we'll have at the retreat is knowing that that DOE grant is coming to a conclusion here, and how and if we're going to be able to, as a community, to continue to try to continue those services. So that will be a challenge. And it may be with partnerships with Eagle County and perhaps Clear or Garfield County, we can do that.
QQ?
Yeah, thank you. We had the most recent QQ meeting over in Silverthorne, or actually Summit County, on Halloween. And, they really don't know what legislation will be introduced yet this session to be able to really have much response for that. The budget of QQ is remaining the same. I think there may have been some small adjustments between, members, how many members there are, and things like that. The main topic of discussion was the oil and gas task force setback requirements and work. And although that really wasn't setbacks on water bodies yet, QQ does have party status through their attorney, Barbara Green, and so we're able to kind of really be closer in on those discussions and negotiations. The emphasis on QQ has been and will continue to be that the state regulations are the floor and not the ceiling of what local communities and local control can exert over oil and gas regulations. They're in pretty good contact now with other communities that are kind of bumping up against this a little faster than we are, which, frankly, I think is a healthy thing, that some of the Front Range communities, Longmont, Boulder County, others are, more testing the limits of the envelope with the governor's response on what powers counties have for oil and gas regulations. And it's really just keeping an eye up on this session's legislative session about whether there will be, as Barbara Green says, whenever they try to clarify county powers, it means they're trying to limit them. And so you have to watch out for that and go forward with that. Various things have been kind of put off that were of concern to water providers and sand districts, and that was the new nutrient standards that the state was looking at. And as much as anything, it was more about let's not create a one-size-fits-all nutrient standard for Denver water dumping into the South Platte shouldn't then affect nutrient standards in other communities that aren't really experiencing the same issues or challenges. The one thing I have heard, I don't know yet what the outcomes will be, but that James Newberry, who is our current chair of QQ through Grant County, was reelected, but there may be some jostling on his board about who will be their water person in the future. And he has been their water person both on the River District and as chair of QQ. So I don't know. I've been just given a heads up to keep my ear to the ground because I'm vice chair of that organization, and they need me to find a new vice chair and move me up. So we'll just see what goes on with that. And so that's kind of it. I can go. Actually, I should go one or two other small water things first because QQ is water. But I was over in Silverthorne yesterday to attend a kind of mini summit from Basin Roundtable groups. So it's Denver Metro, Gunnison, I'm not thinking the South Platte was there, but some other relative attended, Colorado in heavy attendance, particularly around it was focused on the concept of conservation and how much conservation should be built into the, quote, statewide water plan. People are still working with the intention that there will be a statewide water plan given to the governor to adopt by the year 2015. And conservation is one of the four legs of the stool: new supply, existing projects, conservation, ag efficiencies. And it was a good discussion in that we finally got some agreement that the plan should at least target the medium level of conservation. We've been pushing heavily for the high from the western slope, but there are challenges. Particularly, the water providers say, hey, if we're going to take this further, we really need state regulation. We need the state to start saying, these are the building code standards. These are the water efficiency standards for new homes and new construction, that individual water providers, particularly on the Front Range, run into the problem of, well, if you have these high standards here and the next community over 1 mile away doesn't, you just have all your leapfrog development moving around to where there are less restrictive qualities. There's also, I should point out that medium conservation is really about new measures that already take into account what we're calling passive water quality, water improvements, where the cycle of people replacing their toilet fixtures, and knowing that all new toilets that you try to buy from Lowe's or Home Depot or this or that are getting down to that lower and lower water use per flush, or bathroom fixtures, and that everyone will be replacing their washers, clothes washers or dishwashers, with more and more water efficient. So they've already kind of built in what they call the passive savings and are now trying to look for more savings. One of the real gigantic issues is simply, will the West Slope engage in the same type of water conservation that we'd like the Front Range to engage in? And the talking groups were very clear that, how do we sell, you have to do this more on the Front Range in order to get new supply from the West Slope, but the West Slope isn't going to conserve. And of course, people on the West Slope side were willing to say, hey, our return flows, those are important here. Once we go over the mountain, we don't have return flows. The small water providers are very different when you have maybe 500 or 1,000 or 1,200 homes and not have the financial ability to do things that Denver Metro can do on conservation. And then this, continual, I hate to say roadblock or not roadblock, but of the independent local control aspect, so that those communities with a better water supply, why bother conserving? Why bother looking at better land use patterns that conserve water versus, having any form of statewide concern, statewide program? It's been pointed out by others who really have been loath to even adopt this idea that there should be any state regulation, that, look at your automobile gasoline efficiency standards. And if they hadn't been put in place federally, would we ever have started to see 32 mile per gallon cars? And so that's really a challenge. But I would say at the same time, it still continues to push forward to new supply. And so pushing conservation has been something that's been, and efficiency has been just critical to say, look, why even talk about new supplies until you start talking about really efficient conservation on the Front Range? Because otherwise they're just going to go after the new water, and then who knows if they'll ever get efficient. So those questions do continue to just boil up and move forward. So I maybe leave it at that. And the next Colorado Basin Roundtable meeting, if anyone would like to attend, is going to be on Monday, January 14th.
CCI, Jack or Rachel?
I think I'd defer to Rachel since she went to the latest conference.
Yeah, and I'll be brief. I'm sure some of these topics will come back up for us later. I thought it was a really good session, John was there, so it's nice to have someone who can reinforce and check what I heard is the same thing he heard and things like that. But there was a particularly good session on now the implementation of the Colorado legalization of recreational marijuana. And there was a PowerPoint that I hope we can hook Lance and Cindy and John Ely up with. But, I really hadn't thought about the very, very vast number of questions it raises. Things such as, if a police officer arrests you for speeding and you have a half ounce of marijuana in your car, do they have to give you back the marijuana after you've been arrested? Because it wasn't illegal, but are they now in the position of doing something that would federally be illegal? And that if you were to pull someone over and, the officer tells a scent of marijuana, that doesn't mean it's necessarily an impaired driver. What are the new tests to find out if you're impaired or you're not impaired? And so they're going forward with a lot of things. The state's on a very tight timeline because of the ballot language in terms of when they have to have their licensing procedures in place, and then when counties would have to have their licensing procedures in place. And so, it literally raises more questions than were answered clearly by everyone. The state was clear that they intend to go forward with implementation. They're working on these to regulate as it is with alcohol, but they don't have any role models for any of us at this point in time. And the county attorney from Eagle, I think it was, recommended that most counties consider either a ban until you can have a local vote in 2014. I'm not sure if a moratorium was part of that type of recommendation, but they were just very concerned about not being out in front of it the way they weren't really out in front of dispensaries and dispensary licensing. And they like to make sure that they're not in a reactive mode, they're more in a proactive mode. It was pointed out to be very, very clear that even if a county or a city banned a retail location for the sales, that does not mean that every individual can't have 6 plants for themselves or that they cannot smoke. So, it's just where and how it's distributed and how quickly can you get stores appropriately set up. Something I hadn't realized, but it said very clearly in the ballot language that medical marijuana dispensaries cannot sell recreational marijuana. They have to be separate. Whether those functions start to merge over time in terms of closing and reopening, who knows? But it just, again, it raises a lot of questions. It is private recreational use, not public recreational use. So what if you're cutting your grass in your front yard? Is that public or private? If a neighbor complains or not? And so it just said that there's just going to be dozens and dozens and dozens of legal issues that the state will need to work through. That was one of the more intent, I thought, panels. There was a really good panel also on wildfire emergency management training.
Michael, may I ask a very quick question?
Yeah.
Rachel, I was not aware that counties or maybe municipalities would have the ability to ban something. That was in the language in
So what it is, and just to go back on, it's not a ban on personal use, okay? What it is
all about distribution.
Not licensing
Yeah.
the various centers, including there's a new license that's going to be coming forward for testing, I guess, quality testing centers. The state has until July 1st to adopt these rules, so I think we're going to have a lot more clarity. Probably, you got to back that up. They're going to have something in May, probably late April, in order to meet that timeline. So I think we're going to have a lot more clarity about what's coming our way, April, May kind of time frame. There's just a lot of uncertainty. However, on the use side and the personal growing of recreational, that's something that we don't have the ability to ban, but we do have the ability to not license distribution centers and that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, this is certainly going to be a huge challenge, and I think and timelines that dictate. But I think we're going to have to stay quite involved, and this isn't about whether an individual elected official, I think, has the discretion to say, my county won't do this or that. The public, the Constitution has been amended, so we've got to figure out a way to make it work and keep it safe. All that stuff, and residents of Nebraska coming, over, and all that's got to be very well thought out. And I'd rather go slow than make mistakes. But the intent is to make it available. I mean, I'd hate to see every home, those who want to participate, and I have no idea what percentage of the state population is, but I'd hate to see all this growing going on and every, 5 out of 25 units of a condominium complex
I mean, I think that's where you get in trouble, because electricity and multiple plugs and, all of that. So there's got to be a distribution system.
Yeah. Again, we'll all be hearing a lot more about it. I know we're into lunch now. I would like to discuss at least briefly two other things when we come back, and one is that all-terrain vehicle potential legislation coming forward. There's a lot of nuance to that, so when there's more time, we can break into that.
So, Board, what do you want to do? Do you want to come back a little later from our lunch instead of 1:30? Come back at 2 o'clock or something like that? Or do we need to keep our executive session at 2:45?
We have folks coming in for one topic. I can see I don't know what their travel schedule is right now, but there are items that I can address with you ahead of time. So if we go into exec a little early, we have business we can do.
Okay, so how does the board feel?
I would just like to just take an hour for lunch, and then if we can get out earlier from some of the exec stuff, that's great.
Okay, so we'll return here at 1:30.
Yeah.
Okay.
But what are we going to do since we've covered all this other, and we only have open discussion and the rest of board reports? So we'll take another large break?
We'll go into exec early, Jack, because there's...
On the other items, just
Reverse, let's say 1:45, get an extra 15 minutes on this end of things, because then we have from 1:45 basically till 3:15.
We can go into exec earlier than
I know.
So.
That would be, it's up to you guys.
Board, how do you feel? 1:30 or 1:45? That's the
I'll go
question.
1:45, just to
1:45?
hour and
Is
15.
that okay with the rest of the
I'll
board?
have to get my cot out so I can take a nap.
Yeah, I go 1:30.
I'm going to do it for an hour and 15 minutes.
Well, there's three people that say 1:45, so we'll go for 1:45.
1:45.
So, you want me to help you with your cot?
We'll put some chairs together for you, George.
We may end up having another...
Upstairs there's a
45
couch, it's not long, especially you're way
I don't,
down.
we can't schedule Dan earlier.
Yeah.
Oh, well, don't worry. I can.
Thank you. This is the Board of County Commissioners work session for December 4th, 2012. It's about 1:45, and we're at, we left off on our board membership report, but we have a member of the public here who wants to address a paving issue. He thought we were going to be talking about paving in general. Bob, we've already discussed our paving projects, wrap-up supplement budget request, but I understand you also have some...
What I would like to do, simply say this. The road and...
I'm sorry, could you just introduce yourself for the audience?
My name is Robert Throm, Throm. I've been a person who's lived in Aspen for the last 40 years, and I've been involved in many things. For example, the Board of Adjustment of Appeals, I've been on that for 20 years. So I hopefully have done something to help the county out. I was on the, I made all the fundraising for the
Somass Capital Creek.
Somass Capital Creek caucus for 10 years. And so what I'm here today to give you is a report on the road and bridge on Somass, the 4 miles of unpaved property on Somass Creek Road. This year, because there have obviously been no money, there's been no gravel put on the road. The mag chloride lasted less than 2 weeks because when they put it on, we went through that wonderful rainstorm era that we had, the last moisture we've had in a long time. So that didn't work. And so the best way to describe the road now is it's in the summer it's potholes and dust, and in the winter it's ice, snow, or mud. Based on the amount of money that the owners of the 11 properties that are on the 4-mile road, it would appear to me that since you are able to pave the new cover over the project on Roaring Fork is dropped to $1 million, which is paid by the open space, and our taxes, as will be revealed here, over the number of years have been more than necessary to pave our road. I have suggested many times over many years several options to do that job. So I'm once again going to give you those options, and as you have time, I would hope that you would go through this and let me know if there's anything you can do.
Thank you, Bob.
Okay?
Thank you very much. So, Bob, let me suggest to you that our county manager, John Peacock, and Brian Pettit, who's head of Public Works Department, get together with you for a meeting so you can go over it extensively.
Well, we've done it, and I'm more than happy to get together. They're wonderful people. The people that are in that division, that department, are the best. They've done everything they can to keep the road up this year, but obviously there's been no money available to spend on it. And I guess what I'm wondering about is the amount of money that we have paid over the last 10 years. It would appear that if you're able to pave a new bridge for people to ride their bicycles over, it would appear that you may once again consider paving Somass Creek Road. Okay?
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
So, John Peacock, would you contact Bob and make sure that he meets with you and Brian? Yep. Okay. Thank you. So we were in our board reports. have we finished up with CCI, Rachel?
Almost, Michael. And I want to apologize for that, but there's one that is a little more lengthy, which is coming down the pike, and that is the ATV, all-terrain vehicles, off-road, off-highway vehicle discussion. And in October, by a somewhat narrow vote, CCI adopted that introducing legislation on that matter would be a priority for this coming year. There's a little placeholder for it. There's no specific legislation yet. I don't think it is something that really lines up with some of our issues and our concerns, but the issue is that if they have the appropriate safety equipment for going on-road,
This is for ATVs, right?
all-terrain vehicles, off-highway vehicles, there's starting to be a whole series of different types of vehicles. I asked myself, can we have a listing of the types that are covered by this? But essentially, the bill would be to require titling, licensing, and plating, which actually are 3 different activities, and insurance. And the proponents would like to craft a bill such that it then opens all city and all municipal, all county roads to off-road vehicles who have the appropriate safety equipment and a licensed driver that are under 40 miles per hour. And as we all know, well, more than half of the county roads are dirt roads. And so that would make them all available. Now, currently, a county would have the ability to say you can go on these roads whether you're licensed or not, but most counties haven't. And I think we all know the challenges we've had with Lanedo, the parking in Lanedo, the trailering in, the noise and disturbance to the neighbors. But what has become the real crux of it is that other states surrounding us are licensing these vehicles for road use. And then because of interstate commerce and the National Highway Act and highway rules that we're bought into, our traffic controls and regulations are part of a nationwide scheme, the question of reciprocity comes up. And so if a vehicle is licensed in Utah or Montana or somewhere, by all rights, they should be then considered licensed in Colorado. And a case came out of Hinsdale County, Lake City, where they see a lot of ATV traffic in the summer, where someone was arrested from out of state, and they pushed the point and took it to court. And at least through the first 2 levels of court hearings, the judge agreed with the plaintiff that reciprocity has to be recognized in Colorado. I have asked that that decision be forwarded to us, and I still actually haven't gotten it, for John Ely and our Sheriff's Department to take a look at. The issue, there was a good 3-hour discussion about it at CCI to try to identify what are the hot spots and the problems for potential legislation. I would not like to see us necessarily in a position of lobbying against the CCI's position on any bill, but that is always a right that is reserved to the counties, that you don't have to give away your individual rights to represent your community. But the issue is kind of trading what you might consider local control for state control. So no longer would it be 10-year-old riders on these vehicles. They'd have to at least be 16. They'd have to at least have insurance. They'd have to at least have the safety vehicles and follow all traffic routes. But that would mean ATVs and all-terrain vehicles, I think, on Brush Creek Road and Owl Creek Road and any road under 40 miles per hour. And so the proponents will say, what's the difference between these vehicles and smart cars? But I don't know where we're going to end up. I think we need the advice from our sheriff and from our legal department as we continue to make an issue. The big question, I think, is how well they bring in Colorado municipal leagues, because if they exempt all cities from this, then CML will probably stay neutral. But if they're trying to make it that it's all city and county roads, then CML may actually be the opposition that kills it. But the issue, at the end of the day, is not going to go away. That's the real challenge, is that there's a large and growing ATV community. and more vehicles of all sorts are being created to go on roads. So just want to make sure the board was aware of that and see if we can come up with a position as a county.
Thanks, Rachel. Any further items from the CCI?
Can you think of anything else that really came out of that conference?
No.
Well, Thomas Davidson, who's the county commissioner from Summit County, has moved up to be the president of CCI now. It's a rotation pattern that goes by every year, and the commissioner who was slated as VP to move up, Kelly Hodder from La Plata County, was not reelected, so they have skipped over to Thomas Davidson, and I think that's really particularly good because he understands the type of resort community issues that we all have.
Great. Public hearing?
Let's see, I'll be going down to Grand Junction on December 13th. They're having, the Public Land Steering Committee is kind of reviewing all of its past resolutions to see which ones still are timely or which ones need to be updated, which ones they can just get off the books. And that's in preparation for their upcoming work sessions and subcommittee meetings in February. Beyond that, I understand Phyllis attended a very good broadband discussion and day-long symposium that they had on bringing broadband to rural communities. And they did have an executive session or a special board meeting for matters that they didn't get to at their fall meeting, related primarily to the transportation funding and the to-be-decided process that the governor has had. And from that state level, they're trying to still bring more and more stakeholders together to say, okay, what would you support to fix CDOT's budget at some level? And they are anticipating the potential of a 2013 ballot question. The idea of a 10-cent per gallon gasoline tax is being floated, but along with other items such as supporting increased tolling on most roads, because 10 cents a gallon is about 3/4 of the way short of what they need for any sort of real improvements to the roads. It's something. But the crux of that continues to be that the Front Range communities are totally running out of patience with the lack of funding in CDOT. And they are moving forward to produce their own sales taxes through transportation authorities similar to we have in the Roaring Fork, although theirs would be for road improvements, not for transportation. And the fear, and I think probably a very legitimate fear, is that if you were in Lakewood or Centennial or Boulder or any of these communities and you just voted to raise your sales tax, and sales tax is where they're going with that, by a couple cents, you're not going to vote for a statewide transportation funding solution anymore. It's like, I've taken care of my roads. I just agreed to a new 10 cents on every, or 2 cents on every gallon of milk. Why should I now vote for a 10 cents a gallon gasoline tax increase for the Western Slope? And so we're really very concerned that the Western Slope roads will be balkanized and move forward. But the Club 20 discussion on that was pretty clear by a lot of members there, very concerned about what the gasoline tax increase would mean to their shipping and the oil and gas companies, business for farmers and ranchers, so on and so forth, what it would mean. But at the same time, they're like, well, we'd like to see the governor take a stand instead of kind of wanting all task forces or other groups say. And so they did not take a position on supporting any sort of particular measure, but they want to say we're in the game. We're still going to listen, but they really were not willing to get out in front and have their name out in front supporting any sort of funding increase at this time. And so, we all know the situation with CDOT and how tight their funds are and how limited their funds are. I'm personally a little concerned that we're really going to start to see a tolled Interstate 70 and a tolled any roads you'd like to see improved, or if you add a second lane, you can't toll the first lane, but any increased capacity can be tolled. And so, you may save you 10 cents a gallon, but at the end of the day, you're going to be hundreds and hundreds of dollars out of pocket to use the roads that you're used to using today. So that's kind of where Club 20 has been working on a few of those issues. They also had a healthcare assessment through their foundation that Nan Sundin and Liz Stark and Dave Ressler from the hospital kind of helped coordinate in such a way that the questions would be meaningful and help inform our own community health assessment. The Club 20 Foundation had received a very large grant to do assessment of healthcare needs on the Western Slope. And so that was a nice session that they had about 2 weeks ago up here at the Health and Human Service Building.
The Colorado Roundtable?
As I said a little earlier, kind of combined it with QQ. We did just meet in Silverthorne yesterday, and we'll be meeting again in January. The concern I have expressed before, it's still kind of continuing to ramp up on the horizon, is that with the 2015 target date of having a statewide water plan, some basins are promoting the idea of some early action items, or let's put in place these, quote, no regrets policies, so nothing is done that we would regret later and would inhibit statewide water planning. And to that end, they're very concerned about not allowing future designations of wild and scenic, not allowing future designation of threatened or endangered species, and not allowing further recreational in-channel diversions. So from a West Slope perspective, those look like policies that are not no regrets policies, but that may be great regret policies. But they are being framed and put forward that way by the Front Range water providers who don't want anything to inhibit future new supply development programs from the West Slope.
Okay, Ruapa, that we're going to have a meeting this Wednesday, so. And I forwarded to you Mark Fuller's outline of the debt repayment, so.
Yeah, appreciate that, Michael.
Michael,
Yes, John.
on Route I Water and Power, has the authority been involved in this potential sale to multiple entities to pay off the debt for the reservoir? You know, have you had, as an agenda item, discussed that?
Well, we had a representative in front of us, but we haven't discussed it.
I mean, Rudai doesn't own the water. It just operates the hydropower, really.
Right, but it's got a lot to do with the operation, which is the stream flow, which is the tourist economy, which is the board has been involved in. So,
Yeah, really the problem is that they're just advisory in most ways. So, although we've been kept abreast of all those developments, we don't have any veto power, we don't have any budgetary power, we don't have any power really other than the power of contributing to the discussion. So.
I think
yeah, the unfortunate thing I see, now, paying the debt is good, but with all these entities purchasing water, one of the critical issues for the frying pan, town of Basalt, of course, is the economy, flows, fishermen, all of that. And what would it mean? Will there still be coordinated releases? Because I have no idea how this water right fits. This is round 2 or whatever. Maybe they'll call it round 3, but essentially all the water would be bought.
Yeah.
So what does that mean in the operation down the road as far as flows? So that's something that needs to, at least we need to be aware of it as a board.
Yeah, you raise a good point, Jack, because I'm actually not entirely sure if they've already done the NEPA on the delivery of the round 2 sales or they haven't. But the NEPA would be where you could interject concerns on the health of the frying pan. In past conversations with Bureau of Reclamation, they've really held out that, hey, that's a different issue. we have two different branches, because the endangered fish water solution involved RUDI, involved when those releases would be, and they do try to stay below that 300 or 350 CFS in the summer, but they won't commit to it. They won't commit that, that's it for now with 10825, but if all these contracts all get called at the exact same time, I don't know how and what they will do.
Yeah, well, I would like to suggest, and you carry the ball as you wish, Michael, but you might pose that question at a board meeting. Well, how will we be involved in the operations of these ultimate purchases? What will result in the operations, the stream flow? Because we have always, when I was on the board, we've had to be in a very defensive position so the river wouldn't get scoured, literally.
I agree.
Well, we have been in those discussions, and we have been asking those questions. And, in the final analysis, RUDI Water and Power, as I said before, can't veto anything. So it's just a part of asking that. The town of Basalt is threatened more than anyone else, and they have a new member on, Rick Stevens is on and he's coming up to speed on that issue. But the town of Basalt faces a real crisis in terms of the flows coming down the frying pan from RUDI, and they're the ones who really actually do have something at stake, and they need to speak up about it. So,
and when we operated, we negotiated, were involved, etc. We ended up at 300 CFS, and though the town certainly is impacted for the reasons of economy and recreation and all that, by standing together as a board, you have certainly a much larger voice than the singular town municipality.
Yeah, the difficulty is that there's towns downstream on the Roaring Fork that would like to have more flows. So you run the risk of splitting the board on those issues. So, ACRA couldn't make the last meeting because we had a conflict here. So, and RAFTA, I didn't make the last meeting, George. There was a budgetary approval.
The budget was approved for the coming year, and I can't think of anything else that was really...
Was there an update on the BRT?
A brief update, but I just for people to know that there are at least 2 of the new BRT stations are operable now. I got on the new one in Basalt, which was great, and I noticed the new one was open at Buttermilk. I didn't notice at the Airport Business Center, but they're up and running, which is great.
But BRT isn't running.
No, the park and ride and the new bus stations.
Nordic Council?
We met, but there wasn't much going on. We just talked about the project from last summer where we participated with the city of Aspen in terms of planting some new trees on the Aspen Golf Course, and substantial size trees to help with shading, to help preserve snow if and when it gets snow. So that was a good project.
Intermountain TPR?
I did not go to the last meeting. Brian went, and I don't think there was anything substantial
Not that he
that
reported
was
to me.
discussed.
BOCC open discussion? Any open discussion items?
I've got a few items for you. One, George, apparently at the last meeting you requested information about the TARP, which Gary Tenenbaum gave us a quick response and invited more discussion if you wanted to have it. But they used to put up plywood, and that was more intrusive into the breakered body of the structure. They feel like the TARP is going to provide the same level of protection without being so intrusive. They are going to make some improvements to straighten it out so that it looks a little bit less like it's just hanging like a curtain. But
And this was the tarp on what, I'm sorry?
I apologize. This is, you and I both weren't here. It's on the MS store
Okay.
building, and it's to protect the brickwork from salt and such as they're plowing. So I don't know if that, George, answers your question, or if you want more.
No, I mean, I just think it looks kind of shabby, and I understand the issue with the plywood, and I was just curious if they looked at doing like a plexiglass that they could leave up for a while, and you could still see through the plexiglass and see the doors and see the structure, and would still be protective against the snow plow, unless it was going to, again, have the similar problem as plywood in terms of adhering to that brick door surface.
I think you have the adherence, and also it tends to happen with plexiglass when you're getting that kind of material from plows and such, as it turns white. It loses its translucency, it gets scratched up, and it probably wouldn't look a whole lot better.
I know it's an issue, it's a problem. I know Open Space has been trying to discuss this issue with CDOT to see if they can come up with a remedy for this, because we're just doing sort of a haphazardly protection, which needs to be done, but it just looks, we've got a lot invested into this historic building. It's the entrance you see when you first come into Pickens County, and we should be proud of it. We've done such a great job in terms of restoring it. It's just throw a tarp over the front of it.
Let's put that on our discussion for our joint meeting December 18th with Open Space and Trails, and get a real report on what alternatives they've looked into, what they're planning for the future, and if this is going to be a permanent fixture of their preservation program. Jack?
And I also have some experience, very heavy mill Visqueen clear, thicker, not some of the paper bag weight, but that could work, and it would allow what you're looking at. If you had it high enough, I don't think it'd be intrusive. What you've brought up, and I've since seen, really does look pretty ugly. I mean, anyone that's seen it, you go, so I think a little more thought and some action might accomplish this.
Okay.
I'd be interested to see if there's any sort of sealants that they can put on the bricks that would be approved by the Historical Society. It might have the same effect, although you'd have to reseal them periodically.
Well, you still want, excuse me for interrupting, John, bricks are always sealed anyway, and it should be periodic, because that's a heavy use anyway, just even in the rain, and much less snow. But I think it probably does need another protection, for sure.
Any further open discussion on your part, John?
Just want to update you guys. Snowmass Village last night met on the EOTC funding, and they did approve the funding moving forward for the underpass design and engineering. And on Ruby Park, they approved the funding, but to come out of a different lockbox, out of the entrance to Aspen lockbox. So that discussion's going to need to come back to the whole group again. And I think, what their overall discussion or concern really had to do with was governance issues, like how we're making the decisions. And we'll have an EOTC meeting and be going one direction, then it comes back to the individual entities, and any one of the individual entities may choose a different direction, which is kind of what happened with the Ruby Park project to a certain degree. And so I think they're going to be looking for not only a discussion on that particular Ruby Park issue, but I suspect a broader discussion about, is there a better way for us to make these decisions so that the ball doesn't move so far from when it goes to the whole EOTC meeting to the individual communities. So just wanted to give you an update on that, because I know that had come up.
That's going to be a hard one, because then you're taking discretion away from the boards who are supposed to be able to make decisions incrementally. So
it's not going to, yeah.
On that topic, John, it may be worthwhile for staff to explore setting up a retreat time, which we had a retreat a few years ago. And this topic of governance is broad enough topic that I think we need to allow some quality time in terms of discussing it versus just at a regular EOTC meeting.
I agree. And I brought it up when we were looking at the resolution. What does the decision out of this lockbox or that lockbox mean over the longer 10 years of the fund because of, how much the lockbox get repaid for the initial setup of the capital pool could affect how much money is available long-term towards Snowmass for the free bus service. And so Tom had said this only went 5 years because that's about as far as we felt like we really had long-term agreement. But it's always awkward when you don't know what the implications are of what you're doing and where it might leave you in 5 years. So I would certainly support something like that going forward as well.
Okay.
Okay. Last item, just a quick update. I've had an opportunity to sit down both with Adam Frisch and Steve Skadron. It sounds like they'll be the representatives to have the Health and Human Services funding discussion. Nan is working on representatives from the pod. The timing of the discussion, we still need to talk to the city about. I think one council member is thinking December, the other is thinking January. I don't think there's anything so pressing right now, with the exception of, would the city consider the $75,000 from our general fund that we're putting towards detox as, a match for them to up their funding for the 1 year. But really, this is turning into a next year. I think, kind of funding issue, and so I think as long as we have time to have our discussions and come to whatever resolution is going to come out of those by May or June as we're going into our next budget cycle, that's probably the timeline that we need to be worrying about.
May I clarify? John, and I think I've heard this, but is it $75,000 the city is putting up if it's matched?
So at the last meeting, and we still need to get clarification on exactly the decision that was made, but what sounded like came out of their last meeting when Rachel and I were there was that for 2013, the city is going to put in $300,000 for nonprofit funding and would match the county dollar for dollar to get back up to the 380. And so if we were pulling from our general fund to do that. And so we basically stepped back and said, well, we'll go through our budget process and, we'll work through, and if there is appropriate services that would be funded out of our general fund, we'll make those decisions, and then, if in fact we have those, we'll bring them back to you. You can make your own appropriations decisions. And so, per our conversation earlier today, we're putting $75,000 in to support the startup of this.
Was that in the budget?
Detox. That was part of our discussion today.
Oh, the detox. So okay.
Yeah. And so now the question is, okay, we're putting this up out of our general fund. Are you guys going to look at appropriating more? And that'll have to be a decision they make. That's all I have on open discussion.
Board, any open discussion? Yes, Rachel?
Okay. Yeah. My term for representing Colorado Counties, Inc. at the National Association of Counties level for the Public Land Steering Committee will be up, or is up essentially, and there will be a vote in January for both all the new chairs and vice chairs of the various CCI steering committees who have some level of expense of paid to go to the NACO meetings, as well as the Public Land Steering Committee. And so in order to put your name in for consideration on that vote in January, you have to have your board support to continue in that position. And so I just wanted to reaffirm with my board that it would be supported if I put my name in. It's the same type of travel commitment that I've carried out over the past 2 years. So, I'm sorry when I have to miss meetings here, but I think it can be important to kind of that national dialogue about how it affects our public lands and the information I'm able to bring back. So just want you guys' blessing to continue.
Do you need a letter?
verbal or written?
Do you need a letter? I was going to ask, do you need a letter to that effect?
I don't believe so, but I can double check. They have tried to improve some of the processes for chair and vice chair nominations. I don't think it affects public lands. But if you're interested in serving in those positions, you need to put in kind of a letter of application by December 21st and list some of your past experience and why you'd like to serve. And they're trying to make it more transparent than it's been before, because before it was just nominations from the table at the time of the meeting and really no chance to do any sort of comparison of who should serve or why or what they bring to the post. Other than just whether you have an R or D behind your name. And so we're hopeful that will be a better and more open process and lead to more bipartisanship. But I will check and see if we need a letter.
Okay. Is that going to be your question, Jack?
No, I was just going to ask if she needed a letter because I didn't remember about her support, so she'll follow through.
Okay, so do we support it? Yes.
Thank you.
So if a letter is necessary, we'll get a letter.
Yep.
Okay.
Any further open discussion? George?
Two things. One, just go back to a future agenda since I had a chance to look at it.
Oh, okay.
Tomorrow's regular meeting, we have under the public agenda. We have
Open discussion?
No, we have 3 different resolutions. And the first is the airport master plan, and then it's followed by 2 IGAs with Chris Bull. And I was just wondering whether we should flip-flop those and Chris can get in and out quickly, because I'm sure the airport master plan discussion will go on for some time.
We could definitely do that at the beginning of the meeting.
Pardon me?
Changing the order to put the airport at the end.
Okay. We support that, right?
Yes.
Laura? And so you'll let Chris Bull know. He can get his business and go back to his fleet.
Yeah.
So, any other?
Yeah, and then on December 18th, we have our joint meeting with Open Space and Trails. I noticed a lunch break. Is that going to be a working lunch with Open Space and Trails? Typically, we've done that because we've always run out of time.
Yeah, and so usually we kind of play it where we bring a lunch in,
Okay.
and then if we need the time.
Okay. And then last, we all got the great comment letter that Chris Selden did regarding the U.S. Forest Service DEIS process. Is that something we're going to, that's already been sent in, but do we have any discussion points on that, conversation with Chris?
If you want, we weren't bringing it back since it's already been sent in, but if you'd like to, if it's the board's desire to revisit that, we can.
George, you want to revisit it?
Well, I just was curious whether the board wanted to discuss it. I thought it was really well done. My only comment would be that I know he just copied Steve Bennett and Scott Fitzwilliams, and I just wonder whether we should be sending that up the ladder as well. It was such a great letter in terms of comments. It was so inclusive that I think it wouldn't hurt to send it to the BLM director, perhaps Harry Sherman, the Undersecretary for Department of Ag.
And it may be worth a discussion with Chris, because I know he's been very strategic about the comments and where they're being directed, and I guess it may be worth just a brief discussion with him to make sure, so we can set that up.
Okay, we'll do that. Jack?
Yeah, I would, because I do not believe on this letter we'll have really a chance to discuss it. I would just second, third, and fifth George's comments. This was one of the best pieces of work in an organization that does good work all the time. But it was phenomenally in-depth and hit every issue and twist of an issue, both in support of our natural environment, our local economy, and people's health. So it was just a tremendous body of work.
Yeah.
Chris Selden, hats off to you, dude. Probably from all of us.
Any further open discussion on the part of the board? Yes, Rachel?
Yeah, briefly, and it may be something that Public Works is already aware of, but when I went to wash the car I was bringing back last night, the compressor seemed to be leaking a lot of water, jetting up into the air. You turn on the hose and it would be less would jet up, but as soon as you turned the pump on, it was kind of like spraying everywhere. So I'm not sure what's going on there. I didn't do as good a job as usual. I was afraid it's going to blow up or something.
Okay, any further open discussion? We'll move on to prep for the hospital meeting.
Yeah. I had 3 topics to recommend for the hospital board meeting. One I chatted with you briefly about yesterday, which is to get a joint update on the detox program from Colorado West. We're coming up on the timeline where they should be ready, at least with a proposal, and it's coming right about the same time as this joint board meeting. We felt that that was a good opportunity since Aspen Valley Hospital and the county are 2 major partners in that. The other 2 items, one would be the other would be an update on the Aspen Valley Healthcare Alliance and just how those discussions are moving forward and the hospital's view there. And then looking at just a general update on their major construction project that they have going, and maybe having some discussion then around how they made some of their decisions and some of their experience building their structure.
Yes, Rachel?
Those are all topics I support, and I'm not sure if it is ripe for discussion at this time or not, but to give an update with Liz Stark on the community health assessment that we're doing in our role as the Board of Public Health, and kind of where we are with that and what we anticipate having come out of it in terms of fulfilling the state obligations and reporting and things like that.
Yeah, I can check and see if we're ready for that.
Any other items for the hospital prep? Yes, Rachel?
It may just be part of their update on the project, but perhaps you can give them a heads up that I'd be very interested in what are they doing about lighting mitigation on the new development. I think, from emails already, I know that they're kind of working on it, and it is certainly emitting more light at night than they had thought it would, but, it'd be nice to kind of touch base on that.
Any other items for the hospital board? So we've prepped for the hospital board.
Okay. I think we had the exec up next, and we are going to have our folks in about 15 minutes. So if you guys want to call a special meeting and go into exec.
Is there a motion for a special meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
For the purposes of?
This is just a special meeting.
Special meeting, duh.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'll make a motion for a special meeting, for an executive session for the airport layout plan and master plan pursuant to CRS 246402-4B and the SUDI property negotiations pursuant to CRS 246402-4E. Is there anything else on our agenda for executive session?
And just for clarification, it should have been SUDI land exchange and property negotiations.
SUDI land exchange and property negotiations.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Take a few.